The moment Emily Mercer stepped off that wagon into Silver Creek, the town laughed at her face. They pointed. They whispered. The cruelest among them didn't even bother whispering. But what those people didn't know, what they couldn't possibly see, was that this woman they mocked would expose the biggest fraud in the valley's history, destroy a powerful man who'd been stealing from them for years, and completely reshape everything they thought they knew about power, respect, and survival. This is her story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The dust hadn't even settled around the wagon wheels when Emily heard the first laugh. It came from somewhere near the general store, a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Then another joined it. Then voices, not even trying to hide themselves. Lord have mercy, Caleb really scraped the bottom of the barrel this time. Guess beggars can't be choosers, even out here. Emily's fingers tightened around the handle of her carpet bag. 11 days. She'd spent 11 brutal days crossing territory that broke stronger people than her, rattling in wagons that seemed designed specifically to destroy the human spine, sleeping in way stations that smelled like decades of unwashed desperation. And now this. She'd expected it, of course. She'd expected it her entire life, but expecting cruelty and experiencing it were two very different things. The wagon driver, a wiry man named Hutchins, who'd barely spoken 3 sentences to her the entire journey, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Miss Mercer, if you want to go back, I'm heading to—" "No." Emily's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm staying, because what else was there? She'd sold everything she owned to pay for passage west. She had $7.30 left to her name. And back east, there was nothing waiting for her except the same rooms, the same pitying looks, the same slow suffocation of a life that had never quite fit. At least here, she'd answered an honest advertisement. A widowed rancher looking for a woman of strong character to build a life beside. The words had been simple, direct, absent the flowery nonsense most men put in those advertisements when what they really meant was pretty and young and willing to overlook my considerable flaws. Caleb Turner's ad had been different. It felt different. Emily climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady after hours of travel. Her dress was wrinkled and dust-covered. Her hair had given up any pretense of proper arrangement somewhere around day 6. She probably looked exactly like what she was, a 34-year-old woman with no better options, arriving in a town that had already decided what to think of her. The main street of Silver Creek stretched before her, a collection of weather-beaten buildings that looked like they'd been assembled by people who understood function but had never much cared for beauty. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a grain mill at the far end, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left, as if it were tired of standing straight. And people. Lots of people, suddenly very interested in the new arrival. A woman in a faded calico dress stood outside the general store, one hand shading her eyes, lips pursed in evaluation. 2 men sat on a bench near the saloon, not even pretending they weren't staring. A handful of children had stopped their game in the street, watching with the brutal honesty only children possessed. "That's her?" one of them said, loud enough to carry. "That's the mail-order bride?" "Hush your mouth, Jimmy," a woman's voice snapped, but the damage was done. Mail-order bride. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Emily forced herself to breathe evenly. She'd been called worse things. She'd survived worse things. The question was whether she could survive this. "Miss Mercer?" The voice came from her left, and Emily turned to see a man approaching. Tall, maybe 40, with dark hair starting to show gray at the temples. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, creased with lines that spoke of sun and wind and years of squinting at distant horizons. He wore simple work clothes, clean but worn, and his hands showed the calluses of someone who understood physical labor intimately. Caleb Turner. Had to be. Emily met his eyes, bracing herself for the moment of recognition. The moment when he'd realize what he'd gotten, when disappointment would flicker across his face, quickly hidden but unmistakable. It didn't come. Instead, Caleb looked at her with something like relief, as if he'd been worried she wouldn't show up at all. "I'm Caleb Turner," he said, extending his hand. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." His handshake was firm, brief, respectful. Emily found herself momentarily disoriented by the simple courtesy of it. It was manageable, she said, which was a generous interpretation of 11 days in hell, but seemed like the polite thing to say. Manageable. A hint of something that might have been humor touched the corner of Caleb's mouth. That's a kind way to put it. I've made that trip myself. Manageable is charitable. Before Emily could respond, another voice cut through the moment. Well, well, Caleb Turner finally got himself a woman. The speaker was a large man with a red face and the kind of smile that had nothing to do with friendliness. He stood near the saloon with two companions, all of them wearing expressions that made Emily's stomach tighten. Caleb's face didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Wade. Didn't think you had it in you, Turner. Wade Harper, Emily was certain that's who this was, looked her up and down with deliberate slowness. Though I gotta say, I expected, well, different. Then you expected wrong. Caleb's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath it. Miss Mercer traveled a long way. I'd appreciate it if you'd show some respect. Wade laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Respect? Caleb, I'm just saying what everybody's thinking. You put out an advertisement for a wife, and this is what showed up? Must have been slim pickings back east. The words landed like physical blows. Emily had heard variations of this her entire life, but it never stopped hurting. Never stopped making her feel small and wrong and fundamentally unworthy of basic human decency. What happened next, though, she didn't expect. Caleb stepped forward, not aggressive, but absolutely certain, putting himself slightly between Emily and Wade Harper. You've got about 5 seconds to apologize, Wade. After that, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. The street went very quiet. Wade's smile faltered. Now hold on. I was just... Apologize to Miss Mercer. Now. Emily stood frozen, her heart hammering. In her entire life, no one had ever defended her like this. Not family, not friends. Certainly not a man she'd met approximately 90 seconds ago. Wade looked around, clearly expecting support from his companions or the gathered townspeople. What he got instead was silence. Even his friends seemed suddenly interested in the ground near their feet. I didn't mean nothing by it, Wade muttered, still not quite looking at Emily. That's not an apology. Caleb's voice could have cut glass. The big man's face flushed darker. For a moment, Emily thought he might actually swing at Caleb. His hands curled into fists, and the muscles in his jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. But then he looked at Emily directly for the first time. Sorry, miss. Spoke out of turn. It was possibly the most insincere apology Emily had ever received, but Caleb seemed to accept it with a small nod. Miss Mercer's luggage, Caleb said to Hutchins, who'd been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes. I'll settle up with you. The transaction took less than a minute. Caleb paid the driver, collected Emily's single carpet bag. Everything she owned in the world fit in one bag, a fact that felt particularly humiliating in that moment, and gestured toward a wagon parked nearby. The ranch is about 4 miles out, he said. We can talk on the way. Emily followed him, intensely aware of every eye still watching them. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their thinly veiled mockery. Her face burned with shame she hated herself for feeling. The wagon was simple, but well-maintained. Caleb helped her up, another small courtesy that felt strange, and climbed up beside her. Within moments, they were moving, leaving Silver Creek and its cruel audience behind. They rode in silence for the first mile. Emily stared at the landscape rolling past, trying to organize the chaos of thoughts and feelings churning inside her. The valley was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. Rolling hills covered in wild grass, broken by clusters of trees that followed what she assumed were creek beds. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. It was nothing like the crowded, gray cities back east. Nothing like the small, suffocating rooms she'd lived in for the past decade. I apologize for Wade Harper, Caleb said finally. He's an ass, but he's not usually that bold about it. Emily blinked at the casual profanity. You don't need to apologize for him. Maybe not, but I'm sorry you had to hear it. He glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. I should have met you at the edge of town. Spared you the welcome committee. They would have found out eventually. True enough. Caleb was quiet for a moment. But eventually isn't the same as immediately. Emily didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't used to people considering her feelings. It made her suspicious, actually, In her experience, men who seemed kind usually wanted something, and whatever they wanted generally involved making themselves feel better rather than making her feel safe. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. "All right. Why did you come?" The question surprised her with its directness. "Your advertisement—" "No, I know what the advertisement said. I wrote it." Caleb's hands were steady on the reins, his eyes on the road ahead. "What I'm asking is why you specifically answered it. You're educated. That's obvious from your letters. You've got a mind for numbers. You mentioned keeping books for a shipping company. A woman with those skills could find work back east without traveling across half a continent to marry a stranger." Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. Here it was, the moment when Caleb realized he'd made a mistake, when he started looking for a polite way to send her back. "Unless you can't," he continued quietly. "Find work, I mean. Or unless the work you could find wasn't enough to live on. Or unless something about staying there felt worse than the risk of leaving." Emily turned to look at him properly. Caleb's face was thoughtful, not judgmental. He wasn't accusing her of anything. He was just asking. "All of the above," she said finally, the words coming out rougher than she intended. "The work wasn't enough. The city wasn't kind. And staying felt like slow death." Caleb nodded like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "That's honest. I appreciate honesty. What about you?" The question escaped before Emily could stop it. "Why did you place the advertisement?" "Same reasons, mostly." A wry smile touched his face. "Work's not enough on its own. This valley's not particularly kind. And staying alone was starting to feel like slow death." The parallel between their answers sat between them, surprisingly comfortable. "My wife died 3 years ago," Caleb continued. "Sarah. She was sick for a long time before the end. After she passed, I thought I'd be content just running the ranch, keeping to myself. Turns out I was wrong. House is too quiet. Work's too hard for one person. And I got tired of conversations that only happened in my head." Emily understood that last part more than she wanted to admit. "I'm not looking for a replacement," Caleb said. "Sarah was Sarah. Nobody could replace her, and I wouldn't want them to try. But I'm looking for a partner, someone I can build something with, someone who wants to build something too." "And you think I'm that person?" Emily couldn't keep the skepticism out of her voice. "Based on 3 letters?" "Based on 3 very good letters." Caleb glanced at her again. "You write clearly, you ask smart questions, and you were honest about your circumstances without being bitter about them. That told me more than you probably intended." Emily didn't know how to respond to that. She'd written those letters carefully, trying to present herself as capable without seeming desperate, honest without revealing too much. Apparently, she'd failed at the latter. "I'm not going to lie to you," Caleb said. "Life out here is hard. The work's brutal, especially during planting and harvest. The town's got its problems. You saw some of that today. And I'm not an easy man. I'm quiet. I'm particular about how things get done. And I've been alone long enough that I've probably picked up habits that'll drive you crazy." "That's quite a sales pitch," Emily said dryly. Caleb's smile was genuine this time. "Just want you to know what you're getting into. But here's the other side. The ranch is mine, free and clear. It's not big, but it's productive. You'll have your own space, your own room, no expectations beyond what we agree to. And I won't tolerate anyone treating you the way Wade Harper did today. Not in town, not on my property, not anywhere I've got a say in things." Emily felt something dangerous begin to unfold in her chest. Hope. The possibility that this might actually work, that she might actually have found a place where she could breathe. She crushed it down immediately. Hope was expensive, and she couldn't afford it yet. "What exactly are you expecting from this arrangement?" she asked bluntly. "From me?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, navigating the wagon around a rough section of road. "Partnership," he said finally. "Someone to share the work and the decisions, someone to talk to at the end of the day. And eventually, if we suit each other and both want it, maybe something more than that. But I'm not expecting anything beyond basic human decency until we figure out if this can work. And if it can't work, then we figure that out honestly and we make a different plan." Caleb looked at her directly. "I'm not going to trap you here, Emily. If this doesn't work out, I'll make sure you get back east safely, with enough money to start over. I won't leave you stranded." Emily studied his face, looking for the lie. looking for the crack in the facade where the real expectations would leak through. She couldn't find it. Either Caleb Turner was the best liar she'd ever met, or he was actually telling the truth. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. It wasn't large, a main house, a barn, a few outbuildings, all arranged around a central yard. But everything looked solid, well-maintained, cared for. The house itself was simple, a single-story structure with a wide porch and real glass windows. "It's not much," Caleb said, and Emily heard something almost apologetic in his voice. "It's more than I had yesterday," she said honestly. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down, then helped Emily descend. Her legs protested the movement after so many hours of sitting, but she forced them to cooperate. "I'll show you around," Caleb said, grabbing her carpet bag. "Then you can decide if you want to stay for supper or if you'd rather I take you back to town tonight." Emily blinked. "You'd take me back tonight? If that's what you want?" Caleb's expression was serious. "You saw the town. You heard Wade Harper. You've got a sense of what you'd be dealing with. If you want to leave before you're in any deeper, I'll understand." For just a moment, Emily was tempted. It would be easier to leave now, before she got attached to the idea of this place, before she started hoping this could actually work. But easier wasn't the same as better. "Show me the house," she said. Caleb's face relaxed slightly, like he'd been holding tension he hadn't wanted to show. "All right then." The inside of the house was clean and sparse. A main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area with a good iron stove, a dining table that looked handmade. 2 doors led off the main room. "That one's my room," Caleb said, pointing to the door on the left. "This one's yours." He opened the right-hand door and Emily stepped into a room that stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't large, but it had a real bed with a proper mattress, a dresser, a small desk positioned near the window, and a chair. The floor was wood, not dirt. The walls were solid, not canvas or paper-thin boarding, and on the bed lay a quilt, carefully folded. "Sarah made that," Caleb said quietly from the doorway. "Took her 2 years to finish. I thought, well, it seemed right for this room." Emily's throat tightened unexpectedly. The quilt was beautiful, a pattern of stars and squares and blues and creams that must have required incredible patience and skill. "I can't accept this," she managed. "It's already in there," Caleb said practically. "And Sarah would have liked you." She appreciated people who said what they meant. Emily touched the quilt carefully, feeling the tiny, precise stitches. Someone had poured hours of their life into this. Someone who'd never meet her, never know her, but whose work was now being offered as a gift. "The desk was mine," Caleb continued. "Had it since I was a boy. Thought you might want somewhere to write or keep accounts. You mentioned you liked keeping books." "I did." Emily turned to face him, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. "I mean, I do. Like it." "Then it's yours." Caleb stepped back from the doorway. "Take your time settling in. I'm going to tend to the horses and check on the evening chores. There's water in the kitchen if you want to wash up. Supper's in about an hour if you're hungry." He left before Emily could formulate a response, his footsteps crossing the main room and then the porch outside. Emily stood alone in her new room. Her room, Caleb had called it, like it actually belonged to her, and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. She'd expected cruelty. She'd gotten it from Wade Harper and the gathered townspeople, but she'd also gotten something she hadn't expected: protection, respect. A room of her own with a quilt made by a dead woman and a desk that had been waiting for her. Emily sat carefully on the edge of the bed, her carpet bag still in her hand. The mattress was firm and comfortable. Through the window, she could see Caleb walking toward the barn, his movements economical and sure. He'd defended her. In front of the whole town, without hesitation, he'd defended her. Nobody had ever done that before. Emily didn't cry easily. She'd learned young that tears didn't help, didn't change anything, just made people uncomfortable and gave them another reason to dismiss you. But sitting in that quiet room with the late afternoon sun slanting through the window and a dead woman's quilt beneath her hands, Emily felt something crack open inside her chest. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. The dangerous, terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she didn't have to spend every moment apologizing for existing. She allowed herself exactly 2 minutes to feel it. Then she stood, unpacked her few belongings into the dresser, washed her face and hands at the kitchen basin, and went to find Caleb. If this was going to work, She needed to understand the ranch, the work, the expectations. She needed to prove she was capable, useful, worth the risk he was taking. She found him in the barn, forking hay into stalls. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Didn't expect you out here," he said. "You said partnership." Emily crossed her arms, more to give her hands something to do than out of defensiveness. "I figure that means I should know how things work around here." Caleb leaned on the pitchfork, studying her. "You ever work on a farm before?" "No, but I can learn." "It's hard work, harder than keeping books." "Most things are harder than keeping books," Emily said. "That doesn't mean I can't do them." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Respect, maybe, or at least a willingness to believe her. "All right then," he said. "Let me show you around." For the next hour, Caleb walked Emily through the ranch operations. He had 20 head of cattle, a small wheat field, a vegetable garden that clearly needed more attention than one person could give it, chickens, 2 horses, and what he described as ambitious plans for expansion that keep getting delayed. Emily listened, asked questions, and tried to absorb the overwhelming amount of information being thrown at her. She'd never collected eggs, never milked a cow, never operated farm equipment of any kind. But she'd also never kept books for a shipping company before she'd taught herself how. She'd never navigated city streets alone before she'd been forced to. She'd survived 34 years of a world that seemed designed to make women like her disappear. She could learn to collect eggs. "The real challenge," Caleb said as they walked back toward the house, "is keeping track of it all. Expenses, profits, who owes what at harvest. The grain merchant in town handles a lot of that, but I've never quite trusted his numbers." Emily's ears perked up. "You keep your own records?" "Try to. Not very well, if I'm honest." Caleb looked slightly embarrassed. "Numbers aren't my strength. I can manage the physical work, but the accounting side—" He trailed off with a shrug. "I could look at your books," Emily offered. "If you want." "You'd be willing to do that?" "It's what I'm good at." Emily said it simply, a statement of fact. "And if I'm going to be here, I should make myself useful." Caleb's expression did something complicated. "You don't have to earn your place, Emily. I invited you here. You don't owe me anything." "I know that." She did know it, intellectually, but knowing something and believing it were different. "But I'd still like to help, if the offer stands." "It stands." Caleb opened the door to the house, gesturing for her to go ahead. "Thank you." Supper was simple: bread, cheese, some kind of stew that Caleb admitted came from a neighbor who took pity on his cooking skills. They ate at the handmade table, the silence between them more comfortable than Emily had expected. "There's a meeting tomorrow," Caleb said halfway through the meal. "Town council. They gather once a month to discuss valley business. I usually go, but I can skip it if you'd rather not be alone yet." Emily considered. "What kind of business?" "Nothing exciting. Water rights, grazing schedules, whose fence is on whose property, local politics." Caleb broke off a piece of bread. "But it's how I stay informed about what's happening in the valley." "Then you should go." Emily met his eyes. "I'll be fine here." "You're sure?" "I've been alone before, Caleb. I can handle a few hours." He nodded slowly. "All right, but I'll be back before dark." After supper, Caleb showed Emily where he kept his account books, 3 years' worth of ledgers stacked in a wooden crate near the desk that was now in her room. They were a mess, she saw immediately. Numbers crossed out, calculations redone multiple times, pages stained with what looked like coffee, or possibly whiskey. "I warned you I wasn't good at this," Caleb said apologetically. "It's fine." Emily was already pulling out the most recent ledger, her fingers itching to start organizing the chaos. "I've seen worse." That was a lie. She'd never seen worse. But Caleb didn't need to know that. He left her to it, saying something about checking the property line before dark. Emily barely heard him leave. She was already absorbed in the numbers, her mind clicking through patterns and discrepancies with the familiar comfort of a puzzle she knew how to solve. 2 hours later, Caleb found her still at the desk, surrounded by open ledgers and scribbled notes. "You should stop for the night," he said gently. "There's no rush." Emily blinked up at him, disoriented. "What time is it?" "Near 9. Sun's been down for an hour." She'd lost track completely. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" "Don't apologize." Caleb's voice was warm. "It's good to see someone who actually enjoys that kind of work. I just don't want you wearing yourself out on the first day. Emily looked down at her notes, at the numbers that had finally started making sense. Caleb, when you sell your wheat, do you go through Vernon Pike at the grain mill? Everyone does. Why? Because unless I'm missing something significant, his weights are off. Caleb went very still. Off how? Short. Consistently short, by about 3%. Emily tapped her notes. It's subtle enough that you might not notice in a single transaction, but over time, across multiple sales, it adds up to significant money. You're sure about this? Emily met his eyes. I'm very good with numbers, Caleb. And these numbers are wrong. Caleb pulled up the chair from the main room and sat down across from her. Show me. For the next hour, Emily walked him through what she'd found. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Vernon Pike's weights were systematically low, which meant farmers were being paid for less grain than they were actually selling. The difference wasn't large enough to trigger immediate suspicion, but it was consistent enough to be deliberate. That son of a bitch, Caleb said quietly when she'd finished. How much has he stolen from me? Emily consulted her notes. In the past 18 months, approximately $47. Caleb's face went hard. And if he's doing it to me, he's doing it to everyone. Probably. This valley has 38 farms. Caleb stood up, pacing the small room. If he's shorting everyone by the same amount, Jesus, Emily, we're talking about hundreds of dollars. Closer to 1,000, Emily said. Maybe more, depending on how long he's been doing it. Caleb stopped pacing and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You found this in 2 hours? I'm good with numbers, Emily repeated, feeling suddenly self-conscious. You're not good with numbers. You're brilliant with numbers. Caleb shook his head slowly. The town laughed at you today. Wade Harper mocked you in front of everyone, and you just uncovered the biggest fraud in Silver Creek's history. Emily felt heat rise in her face. I don't know if it's the biggest. It is. Caleb's voice was certain. And tomorrow, we're going to do something about it. Tomorrow? Vernon Pike has been stealing from every farmer in this valley, from families who can't afford to lose a single dollar. Caleb's jaw set in a line Emily was starting to recognize. We're going to confront him, get the money back, and make sure everyone knows what he's been doing. Emily's stomach twisted with anxiety. Caleb, maybe we should… What? Stay quiet? Caleb looked at her intently. Let him keep stealing because it's easier than making waves? He's a powerful man in this town. People trust him. People trusted him, Caleb corrected, until you proved he didn't deserve it. Emily wanted to argue, wanted to suggest they move more carefully, wanted to do anything except the thing that would put her directly in the spotlight of a hostile town. But Caleb was right. Vernon Pike was stealing from people who couldn't afford it. And staying quiet about that, just because it was safer, just because it was easier, felt like becoming complicit. All right, she said quietly. Tomorrow. Caleb's expression softened. You don't have to come with me if you don't want to. I can handle Vernon myself. No. Emily surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. The numbers are mine. I should be there to explain them. Then we'll go together. Caleb extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Emily shook it. His grip was warm, solid, sure. Thank you, he said, for finding this, for being willing to stand up about it, and for being here. Emily didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. That night, lying in her new bed under Sarah Turner's quilt, Emily stared at the ceiling and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She'd been in Silver Creek for less than a day, and she was already preparing to take on one of the town's most powerful men. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of thing that could blow up in her face and leave her worse off than she'd started. But it was also the right thing to do, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Emily felt like she might actually have the strength to do the right thing, because she wasn't alone anymore. She had Caleb Turner standing beside her, a man who'd defended her to bullies, who'd given her a room of her own, who'd looked at her accounting skills and seen brilliance instead of peculiarity. Emily rolled over, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Through the wall, she could hear the faint sounds of Caleb moving around in his own room, preparing for sleep. Tomorrow, they'd confront Vernon Pike. Tomorrow, the town that had laughed at her would learn what she was actually capable of. Tomorrow, everything would change. Emily closed her eyes and, for the first time in years, fell asleep without counting all the ways she didn't measure up. Because maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize she'd been measuring herself against the wrong things all along. Emily woke to the sound of roosters and immediate regret. Not regret about confronting Vernon Pike. That still felt necessary, unavoidable, right. But regret about agreeing to do it today when her body still ached from 11 days of travel and her mind hadn't fully caught up to the fact that she was actually here, actually doing this, actually about to challenge a man who'd probably been stealing from farmers since before she was born. She dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, which wasn't saying much. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, and there was a stain near the hem that she'd never quite managed to remove, but it was clean, pressed, and made her look something close to respectable. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was already in the kitchen, frying eggs with the concentration of a man who'd taught himself to cook out of necessity rather than pleasure. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee's ready." Emily poured herself a cup and sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. The coffee was strong enough to dissolve spoons, but after years of watered-down boarding house slop, she didn't mind. "You sleep all right?" Caleb asked, sliding eggs onto 2 plates. "Well enough." Emily accepted the plate he offered. "You?" "Not particularly." Caleb sat across from her, and Emily noticed the shadows under his eyes. "Kept thinking about those numbers, about how long Vernon's been doing this." 8 years, Emily said quietly. "At least, that's as far back as your records go. Could be longer." Caleb's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "You worked through the night?" "Couldn't sleep anyway," Emily shrugged. "Figured I might as well be useful." "Emily, you need to rest sometime." "I'll rest when this is settled." She met his eyes. "I traced the pattern back through every ledger you have. The percentages vary slightly. He's smart enough not to make it completely consistent, but the average shortage is right around 3%. Sometimes 2.8, sometimes 3.2, but it clusters around 3. Caleb set his fork down entirely. "That's deliberate." "Absolutely deliberate, and it gets worse." Emily pulled out the notes she'd brought to the table. "Look at the timing. The shortages increase during drought years when farmers are already struggling and less likely to question the numbers. During good years, he keeps them smaller. It's calculated to stay just under the threshold of what people would notice." "That calculating son of a bitch." Caleb's voice was quiet, which somehow made it sound more dangerous. "He's been systematically robbing people when they can least afford it." Emily nodded. "And based on the valley population you mentioned, if he's doing this to everyone at the same rate, we're looking at roughly $1,400 over 8 years. The number hung in the air between them like a guillotine blade. $1,400, Caleb repeated slowly. "That's not just theft. That's enough to destroy entire farms. Families have lost their land for less than that." "I know." Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He paced to the window, staring out at the dawn-lit fields. "When Sarah was sick those last 6 months, I had to borrow money to pay the doctor. Had to sell off half my cattle herd just to keep us afloat. And the whole time Vernon Pike was stealing from me." Emily heard the rage in his voice, carefully controlled but absolutely present. "If I'd had that $47, Caleb continued, still staring out the window, "I could have kept the cattle. Could have saved Sarah from some of the worry. She spent her last months terrified we'd lose the ranch, and all along, Vernon was stealing the money that might have made a difference. Caleb, I'm not saying it would have saved her." He turned back to face Emily, and his eyes were hard. "The sickness would have taken her regardless. But she died scared, Emily. Scared I'd lose everything after she was gone, and Vernon Pike robbed her of even the small comfort of knowing I'd be all right." Emily didn't know what to say to that. There was nothing to say. Sometimes pain was just pain, and there were no words that helped. "So yes," Caleb said, returning to the table with renewed purpose. "We're confronting him today. And we're getting every stolen dollar back." They finished breakfast in determined silence, both of them preparing mentally for what was coming. Emily washed the dishes while Caleb hitched up the wagon. By the time the sun had fully cleared the horizon, they were on the road to Silver Creek. The ride felt shorter than it had the previous day, probably because Emily spent the entire time rehearsing arguments in her head. She'd brought all the ledgers, all her notes, everything she'd need to prove the fraud conclusively. The evidence was airtight, Vernon Pike couldn't talk his way out of this. At least that's what she kept telling herself. You ready for this? Caleb asked as they approached the town. No, Emily said honestly, but I'll do it anyway. Caleb's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. That's the right answer. Silver Creek looked different in morning light. Less hostile, maybe, or perhaps Emily was just too focused on the coming confrontation to care what the town thought of her. They drove straight to the grain mill, a large wooden building at the end of the main street with Pike & Sons painted across the front in fading letters. Vernon Pike's office was on the second floor, accessed by an external staircase that creaked ominously under their weight. Caleb knocked once, firmly, and didn't wait for an invitation before opening the door. Vernon Pike looked up from his desk with the mild irritation of a man interrupted during important work. He was in his late 50s, Emily guessed, with thinning gray hair and the soft build of someone who'd spent decades counting money instead of lifting it. Caleb, Vernon said, surprise flickering across his face. I wasn't expecting you. And this must be the new Mrs. Turner? Miss Mercer, Emily corrected quietly. Of course, forgive me. Vernon's smile was professionally warm and completely insincere. What can I do for you folks this morning? Caleb didn't sit, didn't offer pleasantries. Your scales are wrong, Vernon blinked. I beg your pardon? Your scales, Caleb repeated. They're measuring short. Have been for years. Now, Caleb, that's a serious accusation. Vernon's voice took on a patronizing edge. These scales are calibrated regularly. If you're concerned about a specific transaction, it's not one transaction. Emily stepped forward, setting the stack of ledgers on Vernon's desk with a solid thump. It's every transaction, for at least 8 years. Vernon looked at her properly for the first time, his eyes traveling from her face to the ledgers and back again. I'm sorry, Miss Mercer, was it? But I'm not sure you understand the complexities of agricultural commerce. I understand arithmetic, Emily interrupted, her voice sharper than she'd intended. And your arithmetic is wrong. Consistently, deliberately wrong. That's absurd. Vernon stood, drawing himself up to his full height, which was still several inches shorter than Caleb. I've been doing business in this valley for 23 years. My father operated this mill before me. Our reputation is beyond reproach. Your reputation is built on theft. Emily opened the top ledger, her finger landing precisely on the column of numbers she'd marked. You're shorting farmers by an average of 3% per transaction. Small enough to avoid immediate notice, large enough to add up to significant money over time. Vernon laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin can. This is ridiculous. Caleb, surely you don't believe— Show him, Caleb said to Emily, his voice flat. For the next 20 minutes, Emily walked Vernon Pike through the evidence. She showed him the pattern of discrepancies, the correlation with drought years, the mathematical impossibility of the shortages being accidental. She laid out 8 years of careful documentation, transaction by transaction, until the fraud was undeniable. Vernon's face changed as she talked. The patronizing amusement faded first, replaced by annoyance, then anger, then something that looked like genuine fear. Even if there were discrepancies, Vernon said when Emily finally finished, his voice tight, that doesn't prove deliberate wrongdoing. Equipment fails. Mistakes happen. You can't possibly— I can. Emily pulled out her final piece of evidence, a chart she'd made showing the exact pattern of shortages plotted against valley economic conditions. The variance is too controlled to be random, too perfectly calibrated to farmer vulnerability to be accidental. This is systematic fraud, Mr. Pike, and you know it. The office went very quiet. Vernon looked at the chart, then at Emily, then at Caleb. His face had gone from ruddy to pale, sweat beading along his hairline. You need to leave, he said finally. Both of you. Right now. We're not leaving, Caleb said. Not until you agree to repay every dollar you've stolen. I haven't stolen anything, Vernon's voice rose. And I won't be accused of such things by some mail-order bride who doesn't know the first thing about this valley or how business works here. Emily felt the insult land, felt the familiar shame trying to rise up and swallow her whole. But before she could respond, Caleb moved. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply placed both hands on Vernon's desk and leaned forward, his voice dropping to something quiet and absolutely deadly. You will apologize to Miss Mercer, and then you will open your books and show us every transaction from the past 8 years, and then you will calculate exactly how much you've stolen from this valley. and then you will figure out how to pay it back. Or what? Vernon tried to sound defiant, but his voice shook. You'll what, Caleb? Assault me in my own office? No, Caleb straightened. I'll take this evidence to every farmer in Silver Creek, and then we'll see how long your reputation lasts when 38 families realize you've been robbing them blind. Vernon's face went from pale to gray. You wouldn't. Try me. The two men stared at each other, and Emily realized she was watching something like a chess match played out in silence. Vernon was calculating odds, weighing risks, trying to find a way out that didn't destroy him completely. Get out of my office, he said finally. Both of you, now. Is that your final answer? Caleb asked. It is. All right then. Caleb gathered up the ledgers, handing half to Emily. Come on. We've got 37 more stops to make. They were halfway down the stairs when Vernon called after them. Wait. Emily and Caleb turned. Vernon stood in the office doorway, looking 10 years older than he had 15 minutes ago. Let's discuss this reasonably. I'm sure we can reach some kind of arrangement. The arrangement is simple, Caleb said. You pay back what you stole. Every penny. That's impossible. Even if your numbers were accurate, which I'm not conceding, that kind of money doesn't just appear overnight. Then you sell assets, take out a loan. I don't particularly care how you do it. Caleb's voice was stone. But you will do it. Vernon's jaw worked silently for a moment. And if I agree to repay the money, this matter stays private? No, Emily said, surprising herself. Both men turned to look at her. This doesn't stay private. Every farmer in this valley deserves to know what you did. Miss Mercer, please be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Emily's voice was steady despite the fear hammering in her chest. You stole from people who trusted you, from families who could barely afford to eat, from widows and struggling farmers and people who had nothing to spare. They deserve to know the truth. The truth will destroy my business, Vernon said, and for the first time he sounded genuinely desperate. Please, I'll pay the money back, every dollar, with interest. But if this becomes public knowledge, I'm ruined. You should have thought of that before you started stealing, Caleb said. They left Vernon standing in his doorway and descended to the street. Emily's hands were shaking by the time they reached the wagon. Adrenaline and fear and something like triumph all fighting for dominance in her system. That went well, Caleb said dryly. Emily let out a laugh that sounded slightly hysterical even to her own ears. Did it? You cornered him completely. He knows we have him. Caleb helped her into the wagon. Now comes the hard part. That wasn't the hard part. That was just Vernon. Now we have to convince the town. Emily's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on confronting Vernon, on proving the fraud, that she hadn't fully thought through what came next. Convincing skeptical farmers to believe a woman they'd mocked yesterday. Going public with accusations against one of the valley's most respected businessmen. Fighting a battle they might not win. We should go to the sheriff first, Caleb was saying, already turning the wagon toward the center of town. Get him on record about the evidence. Then start talking to other farmers. Caleb, wait. Emily grabbed his arm. Are you sure about this? Making it public? Are you having doubts? I'm having practical concerns. Emily took a breath. Vernon Pike has power in this town. Friends, connections, money. If we do this wrong, if we push too hard too fast, he'll find a way to discredit us. Discredit me. Caleb studied her face. What do you suggest? We gather allies first, quietly. Talk to a few farmers you trust, show them the evidence, get them on board before we go public. Emily was thinking out loud now, planning strategy the way she used to plan accounting ledgers. If we have other voices backing us up, it's harder for Vernon to paint this as a personal vendetta. That's smart. Caleb nodded slowly. Who should we start with? Who do you trust most in this valley? Caleb considered. Marcus Webb. Has a ranch about 6 miles north. Good man, honest. Lost his wife around the same time I lost Sarah. If anyone will listen, it's him. Then we start there. But before they could leave town, a voice called out from the street. Well, well, if it isn't Caleb Turner and his lady friend. Wade Harper stood outside the saloon, same 2 companions flanking him, all 3 of them looking like they'd started drinking well before noon. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept the wagon moving. Not now, Wade. What's the matter, Turner? Too busy to talk to old friends? Wade stepped into the street, forcing Caleb to stop or run him over. Heard you caused quite a scene at Vernon's office this morning. Half the town's talking about it. Then half the town needs better things to do, Caleb said. Wade's eyes shifted to Emily, and his smile turned mean. Let me guess. The mail-order bride thinks she found something wrong with Vernon's books? That's precious. Move aside, Wade, Caleb said quietly. Or what? Wade took another step closer. You going to defend her honor again? Make yourself look like a fool over some woman who probably can't even read properly, let alone— The scales are wrong, Emily said loudly, before Caleb could respond. Her voice carried across the street, drawing attention from passing townspeople. Vernon Pike has been cheating every farmer in this valley for years, and I have the evidence to prove it. The street went silent. Wade's smile faltered. That's a serious accusation, lady. It's the truth. Emily stood up in the wagon, her fear transforming into something sharper, more useful. Anger. Vernon's weights measure short by 3% on average. It's subtle enough that you don't notice it in one transaction, but over time it adds up to hundreds of dollars stolen from struggling families. People were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Emily recognized some faces from yesterday, the woman in calico, the men from the bench, others she didn't know. And how would you know that? Wade challenged. You just got here yesterday. I know because I spent the night reviewing 8 years of transaction records. Emily looked directly at Wade, refusing to let him see her shake. I know because I'm very, very good with numbers. Better than Vernon Pike expected. Better than you expected. Wade's face flushed red. You think you're smart, don't you? Think you can come into our town and start making accusations against respected businessmen? I think Vernon Pike has been stealing from you, Emily shot back. From all of you. And I think you should check your own receipts before you dismiss what I'm saying. This is crazy, someone in the growing crowd muttered. Vernon's been running that mill for decades. Exactly, another voice agreed. Why would he suddenly start cheating people now? Not now, Emily said, her voice rising to carry. For years. Maybe decades if he learned it from his father. Check your records. Compare what you sold against what you were paid for. Do the math yourselves. The math, Wade scoffed. Listen to her, talking about math like she's some kind of expert. I am an expert, Emily said, and felt something shift inside her as she said it. I kept books for a shipping company for 6 years. I managed accounts for 3 different businesses back east. I'm very good at what I do, and Vernon Pike made a mistake when he assumed I wouldn't notice his fraud. Fraud's a strong word, a new voice said. Emily looked down to see a tall man in a suit, a lawyer probably, based on his dress and bearing. You might want to be careful about making accusations you can't prove. I can prove it, Emily said. I have the ledgers, the calculations, the pattern analysis. Anyone who wants to see the evidence is welcome to review it. The lawyer's eyes narrowed. And you're willing to testify to this? Publicly? Under oath if necessary? Emily's mouth went dry. Testifying meant courts, official proceedings, her name attached to everything. It meant becoming the public face of this accusation, the target for anyone who wanted to defend Vernon Pike. It meant stepping into the light in a way she'd spent her entire life avoiding. Yes, she heard herself say. I'm willing to testify. Caleb stood beside her, and though he didn't touch her, she felt his presence like a wall at her back, supporting her, believing in her. This is insane, Wade said, but he sounded less certain now. Vernon Pike is a pillar of this community. Then let him prove me wrong, Emily challenged. Let him open his books to public inspection. Let him explain why the numbers don't match. If I'm lying, it should be easy to demonstrate. The crowd murmured, people exchanging glances, calculations happening behind their eyes. Some looked skeptical. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked angry, though Emily couldn't tell if the anger was directed at her or Vernon. I want to see these ledgers, someone called out. Emily recognized him, an older farmer with sun-weathered skin and suspicious eyes. Me too, another voice agreed. If Vernon's been cheating us, we got a right to know. This is mob mentality, the lawyer said sharply. You can't just— We can ask to see the evidence, the older farmer interrupted. That's not mob mentality, that's common sense. Within minutes, a plan formed. 8 farmers, including Marcus Webb, who'd pushed his way to the front of the crowd, agreed to meet at Caleb's ranch that evening to review Emily's findings. The lawyer insisted on being present. Someone suggested bringing the sheriff, which prompted a long argument about whether the sheriff could be trusted given his family connections to the grain mill. Emily stood in the wagon through all of it, listening to people debate her credibility, her sanity, her right to make such accusations. Some defended her. Most questioned her. Wade Harper continued making snide comments until Marcus Webb told him to shut his mouth or lose teeth. Through it all, Caleb stood beside her, silent but present, his very existence a statement that she wasn't alone in this. Finally, the crowd dispersed, people returning to their business with plenty to discuss. Emily sat back down in the wagon, suddenly exhausted. "Well," Caleb said quietly, "that escalated." Emily let out a shaky laugh. "I may have gotten carried away." "You were magnificent." Caleb's voice was warm with pride. "Vernon Pike has no idea what he's up against." "8 farmers tonight," Emily said, reality sinking in. "I need to organize the evidence properly. Make it clear enough that anyone can understand it. Show my work so they can verify every calculation." "You've got 8 hours," Caleb said, turning the wagon toward home. "That enough time?" "It'll have to be." They rode in silence for a while, Emily's mind already racing through how to present the information most effectively. Charts, probably. Side-by-side comparisons, a clear timeline showing the progression of the fraud. "Emily," Caleb said as they turned onto the ranch road, "what Wade said back there, about you not being able to read, I know what he said. It was wrong, cruel and wrong." Caleb glanced at her. "You know that, right?" "I know." Emily stared at the landscape rolling past. "But it's what people think. What they'll keep thinking until I prove otherwise. You're already proving otherwise. To you, maybe. To Marcus Webb, apparently. But the rest of them?" Emily shook her head. "They see a desperate woman who answered a mail-order advertisement. They see someone beneath them, someone they can mock without consequence. And now I'm asking them to believe that woman is smart enough to uncover fraud their trusted merchant has been perpetrating for years. Are you saying we should stop?" Caleb asked quietly. "No." Emily turned to look at him. "I'm saying this is going to be harder than just showing them numbers. We're asking them to fundamentally rethink their assumptions about Vernon, about trust, about who deserves to be believed." "About you," Caleb said. "About me," Emily agreed. They reached the ranch as the sun approached its zenith. Emily went straight to work, spreading ledgers across the kitchen table, the desk in her room, even the floor. She made charts showing the shortage patterns. She calculated total losses per farmer, theoretical since she only had Caleb's records, but scalable based on farm size. She prepared arguments for every counterpoint she could imagine. Caleb brought her lunch, which she barely touched, brought her coffee, which she drank without tasting. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer unhelpful suggestions, just let her work with the quiet support of someone who understood when to speak and when silence was the greater gift. By the time the first wagon rolled up to the ranch that evening, Emily had transformed the chaos of evidence into something clear, undeniable, and devastating in its implications. Marcus Webb arrived first, along with 2 other farmers Emily didn't recognize. Then came the lawyer. His name was Thornton, apparently, looking distinctly unhappy about being there. The sheriff showed up next, a heavy-set man named Dalton, who kept emphasizing he was just here to observe, not make accusations. By 7 o'clock, 11 people crowded into Caleb's main room, all of them staring at Emily with varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and hostility. Emily stood at the head of the table, her carefully prepared charts arrayed before her, and faced the men who would decide whether she was brilliant or crazy. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know this is an unusual situation, but what I'm about to show you affects every farming family in Silver Creek." She walked them through it step by step. The pattern of shortages, the correlation with economic hardship, the mathematical impossibility of the discrepancies being accidental. She showed her calculations, explained her methodology, invited them to check her math. For 90 minutes, she lectured like a professor, answered questions like a lawyer, and defended her conclusions like someone fighting for her life. Because in a way, she was. When she finally finished, the room fell silent. Men exchanged glances, some convinced, some still doubtful, all of them processing the implications. This is compelling, Thornton the lawyer said finally. I'll grant you that, Miss Mercer, but compelling isn't proof. What more proof do you need? Emily challenged. I've shown you 8 years of documentation. Documentation from one farm, Thornton interrupted. To prove a pattern of fraud against the entire valley, we'd need to see if the same discrepancies appear in other farmers' records. Marcus Webb cleared his throat. I can get my ledgers, if Miss Mercer's willing to review them. And mine, another farmer said. Mine too, a third agreed. Within minutes, 5 farmers had committed to bringing their records for Emily to analyze. The lawyer grudgingly admitted this would constitute stronger evidence. The sheriff said he'd need to see at least 3 independent confirmations before he could justify any official action. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. As the meeting broke up and people began leaving, Marcus Webb approached Emily directly. That was impressive, he said. Don't think I've ever seen anyone explain numbers that clearly. Thank you, Emily said, surprised by the genuine respect in his voice. My wife used to keep our books, Marcus continued. She was good with figures, too, though she never had formal training like you. When she passed, I let things get sloppy. He paused. Guess that made it easier for Vernon to cheat me. It's not your fault, Emily said. Maybe not. But I should have been paying closer attention. Marcus met her eyes. I'll bring my ledgers by tomorrow. All of them, going back as far as I got. And Miss Mercer? Don't let Wade Harper or anyone else make you doubt yourself. You're twice as smart as most men in this valley, and that terrifies them. He left before Emily could respond, leaving her standing in the emptying room with a strange warmth spreading through her chest. Caleb closed the door behind the last visitor and turned to her. You did it. We're not done yet, Emily said. 5 farmers isn't... Emily. Caleb crossed the room, stopping close enough that she could see the pride in his eyes. You convinced them. Men who came here expecting to humor me at best prove you wrong at worst, and you change their minds with nothing but evidence and intelligence. Some of them still doubt. Some of them will always doubt. That's not the point. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. The point is you stood in front of people who laughed at you yesterday and made them listen, made them think, made them question assumptions they've held for years. Emily felt something crack in her chest, the same dangerous feeling from last night, but stronger now. Hope. Not just possibility anymore, but actual terrifying hope that maybe she could do this. Maybe she was strong enough to see it through. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. I know, Caleb said. So am I. But we're doing it anyway. Emily looked at him, this man who'd defended her to bullies, who'd built her a desk before knowing if she'd come, who stood beside her while she challenged the power structure of an entire valley. Why? She asked. Why are you doing this? You could settle with Vernon quietly, get your money back, avoid all this mess. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Because it's right, and because you deserve to be believed. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you well enough, Caleb said. And Emily, you need to start believing it too. He left her then, heading to tend the evening chores, leaving Emily alone with her charts and her evidence and the strange, growing certainty that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she didn't have to be small anymore. Tomorrow would bring more ledgers, more analysis, more battles with people who didn't want to believe what she'd uncovered. But tonight, Emily let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not in spite of what she was, but because of it. Because she was brilliant with numbers, and she'd used that brilliance to expose the truth, and for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. Marcus Webb showed up at dawn with 4 years of ledgers in a wooden crate. Emily was already awake, had been since 4, unable to sleep with the weight of what came next pressing against her ribs. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee when she heard the wagon approach, and by the time Marcus knocked, she'd already cleared space for his records. Didn't figure you'd be sleeping, Marcus said by way of greeting. My Anna used to get like this before big moments, too keyed up to rest. Emily took the crate from him, surprised by its weight. This is everything? Everything I kept anyway. Anna was better about it than me. After she died, I got sloppy. Some years are incomplete. He looked almost embarrassed. Didn't seem important at the time. It's enough, Emily said, already pulling out the top ledger. Her fingers itched to start cross-referencing, to find the pattern she knew would be there. Thank you for trusting me with these. Marcus studied her face for a moment. You remind me of her, you know. Anna. Not in looks, but in the way you get when you're working on something. Like the rest of the world disappears and all that exists are the numbers. Emily didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. I'll be back this evening, Marcus said. Want to see what you find? After he left, Emily dove into the records with the single-minded focus that had served her well back east. The morning vanished into columns of figures, transaction dates, calculated discrepancies. By noon, she'd confirmed the pattern in Marcus's books. The same 3% average shortage, the same correlation with drought years, the same careful calibration to stay just below notice. Caleb brought her lunch that she forgot to eat, brought her fresh coffee that went cold while she worked. He'd learned not to interrupt, just set things within reach and disappeared back outside. The second farmer arrived mid-afternoon, Thomas Brennan, younger than Marcus, with suspicious eyes and a defensive posture. He dropped his ledgers on the table with enough force to make Emily jump. My wife thinks this is nonsense, he said bluntly. Says Vernon Pike's been nothing but fair to us for years. Emily looked up from Marcus's records, blinking away the numbers that had consumed her vision. Then the ledgers will prove her right. Or they won't, Thomas said. Or they won't, Emily agreed. Either way, you deserve to know the truth. Something in Thomas's face softened slightly. How long will this take? A few hours, probably. Depends on how organized your records are. They're a mess, Thomas admitted. Never been good with bookkeeping. Vernon always said not to worry about it, that he'd handle the complicated parts. Emily's stomach tightened. Did he now? By evening, 3 more farmers had delivered their ledgers. Emily's desk was buried under years of agricultural commerce, and her eyes burned from hours of sustained focus. But the pattern held. Every single set of records showed the same systematic shortage. The percentages varied slightly. Vernon was smart enough to prevent perfect consistency. But the underlying fraud was undeniable. When the farmers returned that evening, Emily had prepared a comparison chart showing all 5 farms. The evidence was devastating. Sweet suffering Christ, Thomas Brennan breathed, staring at the numbers. His face had gone pale. He's been robbing us for years. How much? Marcus asked quietly. Total across all our farms? Emily consulted her calculations. Based on these 5 farms alone, approximately $370 over the past 4 years. But some of you have incomplete records, so the actual amount is likely higher. $370, another farmer repeated. His name was Cooper, and he looked sick. I lost half my herd 2 winters ago because I couldn't afford feed. Blamed myself for poor management. And all along, Vernon was stealing the money that could have saved them, Marcus finished grimly. The room fell into heavy silence. Emily watched the men process what they were seeing, watched anger and betrayal war with disbelief on their faces. What do we do now? Thomas asked. We can't just let him get away with this. We go to the sheriff, Marcus said. Make it official. Sheriff Dalton's cousin works at the mill, Cooper pointed out. You think he's going to move against Vernon based on accusations from a woman who's been in town 2 days? These aren't accusations, Emily said sharply. This is evidence. Mathematical proof. I believe you, Cooper said, raising his hands. But Dalton's going to need more than numbers on paper. He's going to need Vernon to actually admit wrongdoing, or he's going to find some way to dismiss this whole thing. Then we force Vernon to admit it, Caleb said from the doorway. He'd been listening quietly, letting the farmers work through their anger. We confront him again, this time with multiple victims and undeniable proof. He'll just deny everything, Thomas said. Claim the scales are fine, that we're misremembering transactions, that he already knows he's caught, Emily interrupted. When Caleb and I confronted him yesterday, he tried to negotiate, offered to repay the money quietly if we kept it private. That's not the reaction of an innocent man. Marcus nodded slowly. She's right. Vernon knows his fraud is exposed. Now he's just trying to minimize the damage. So we maximize it instead, Caleb said. We make this public. Force him to either admit the theft or prove the scales are accurate. And if he proves the scales are accurate, Cooper asked, if somehow we're wrong about this? We're not wrong, Emily said with absolute certainty. The math doesn't lie. No, Marcus agreed, but men do. And Vernon Pike's been lying to this valley for years. Question is, do we have the stomach to call him out? One by one, the farmers nodded. Some reluctantly, some angrily, but all of them committed. "Tomorrow morning," Marcus said, "we go to Vernon's office together, demand a full accounting and public restitution." "He won't agree to that," Thomas said. "Probably not," Marcus agreed, "but we make the demand anyway, on record, in front of witnesses. So when this goes to the county judge, we can prove we tried to settle it reasonably first." The plan solidified over the next hour. They'd approach Vernon as a group, present the evidence publicly, demand restitution. If he refused, which everyone expected, they'd file a formal complaint with the sheriff and petition for a county investigation. After the farmers left, Emily sat at the table surrounded by evidence of systematic fraud and felt the weight of what they'd started settling onto her shoulders. "You all right?" Caleb asked, sitting down across from her. "I'm terrified," Emily admitted. "Tomorrow we're going to accuse one of the most powerful men in Silver Creek of fraud, in front of the whole town. And even with all this evidence, there's a chance they'll side with him instead of us." "There's a chance," Caleb agreed. "But there's also a chance they'll finally see the truth. What if I'm wrong?" The question escaped before Emily could stop it. What if I missed something, made a calculation error, and we're about to destroy Vernon's reputation based on my mistake? Caleb reached across the table, covering her hand with his. The gesture was simple, brief, but steadying. "You're not wrong," he said. "I've watched you work for 2 days straight. I've seen how carefully you check every calculation, how thoroughly you document everything. You're the most meticulous person I've ever met, Emily. If there was an error, you would have found it." "You can't know that." "I can," Caleb said, "because I know you. Maybe not for long, but well enough to trust your abilities." Emily looked at their hands, his calloused and strong, hers stained with ink and trembling slightly. "Why do you believe in me so completely? You barely know me." "I know enough." Caleb withdrew his hand, but his eyes stayed on her face. "I know you're brilliant. I know you're honest. And I know you care about doing the right thing even when it's terrifying. That's enough for me." Emily wanted to believe him, wanted to accept his faith at face value and stop questioning her own worth. But 34 years of being dismissed, overlooked, and mocked didn't disappear in 3 days just because one man believed in her. She went to bed that night with her mind churning through every possible outcome. Vernon could have allies they didn't know about. The sheriff could refuse to investigate. The county judge could dismiss the case before it even started. A dozen different ways this could fail, and Emily played through each one like a morbid rehearsal. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of numbers that wouldn't balance. Morning arrived too quickly. Emily dressed with shaking hands, choosing her most professional-looking outfit, which still looked shabby compared to the fine dresses she'd seen on Silver Creek's wealthier women. She pinned her hair back with ruthless efficiency, trying to look competent and serious rather than terrified. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was waiting with coffee and a look of quiet determination. "You ready?" he asked. "No," Emily said honestly, "but let's go anyway." They met the other farmers in front of the general store at 9 o'clock sharp. Marcus Webb, Thomas Brennan, Cooper, and 2 others, Hanson and Pierce, all dressed in their Sunday clothes, all carrying ledgers and grim expressions. "Thornton's already at Vernon's office," Marcus reported. "Said he wanted to be present to ensure everything stays legal." "Whose side is he on?" Caleb asked. "His own probably, but he knows if this goes to court, he'll want to have been on the right side from the beginning." They walked together to the grain mill, and Emily noticed people stopping to watch. Word had spread, obviously. By the time they climbed the stairs to Vernon's office, a small crowd had gathered in the street below. Vernon was behind his desk, Thornton the lawyer standing beside him. Vernon's face was carefully neutral, but Emily saw the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. He knew what was coming. "Gentlemen," Vernon said, ignoring Emily entirely, "I assume this is about yesterday's misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Marcus said flatly. "You've been cheating us, Vernon, for years, and we want our money back." Vernon's expression shifted to something like pained patience. "Marcus, I understand you're upset, but these accusations are baseless. My scales are calibrated regularly. If there have been any discrepancies, there have been systematic discrepancies," Emily said, stepping forward. "Averaging 3% per transaction, occurring consistently across multiple farms, correlating directly with economic hardship in the valley." Vernon finally looked at her and his eyes were cold. Miss Mercer, I'm sure you mean well, but you don't understand the complexities of agricultural commerce. Small variations are normal, expected even. Small variations that always favor you? Emily interrupted. That's not variation, that's theft. That's a serious accusation, Thornton interjected. Do you have proof? Emily set her chart on Vernon's desk with deliberate precision. This shows transaction data from 5 different farms over the past 4 years. All show the same pattern of shortage. The probability of this being coincidental is mathematically negligible. Thornton studied the chart, his lawyer's mind working through the implications. Vernon didn't even look at it. I won't be railroaded by a woman who doesn't know the first thing about this valley, Vernon said, his voice rising. I've been serving Silver Creek for 23 years, my father before me for 30. Our reputation? Your reputation is built on stolen money, Caleb cut in, and we're done letting you hide behind it. You're making a mistake, Vernon said, and now he sounded desperate. All of you. If you push this, if you make these accusations public, you'll tear this valley apart. Families will be set against each other. Trust will be destroyed, all because of some numbers that a stranger misinterpreted. I didn't misinterpret anything, Emily said coldly. You stole from these men, from their families, from people who trusted you. Prove it, Vernon challenged. Prove it in a way that actually matters. Show me evidence that would stand up in court, not just your arithmetic. The arithmetic is the evidence, Emily said. The arithmetic is your opinion. Vernon leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking more confident. And opinions aren't facts, Miss Mercer. You can calculate all you want, but without physical proof, without witnesses to actual wrongdoing, all you have is speculation. Emily felt her certainty waver. He was right, in a terrible way. She had the numbers, had the pattern, had the mathematical proof. But in a court of law, would that be enough? Or would Vernon's lawyers find a way to discredit her, to paint her as an outsider with delusions of competence? We have 5 farmers with identical patterns of shortage, Marcus said. That's not speculation. That's 5 farmers who trusted a woman they don't know over a man who served them for decades, Vernon countered. I'm sorry, Marcus, but I think you've been misled. By who? Marcus's voice was dangerous. By Miss Mercer, who has nothing to gain from lying? Or by you, who's been pocketing money from every transaction for years? I've pocketed nothing. Vernon stood abruptly. My scales are accurate. My business is honest. And I won't stand here and be accused of fraud by a collection of farmers who've let some mail-order bride convince them. Caleb moved so fast, Emily barely saw it. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he had Vernon pressed against the wall, forearm across the older man's chest. You will not speak about her that way, Caleb said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. You will not dismiss her intelligence, her work, or her integrity. Do you understand me? Caleb, stop, Thornton said sharply. You're assaulting him. He's defending himself against slander, Marcus said. Didn't see any assault. Caleb held Vernon against the wall for another long moment, then stepped back. Vernon straightened his shirt with shaking hands, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. Get out, Vernon said. All of you, before I have the sheriff arrest you for assault and harassment. Try it, Cooper said. See how that plays when we file countercharges for fraud. You have no proof of fraud. We have enough to start an investigation, Thornton said unexpectedly. Everyone turned to look at him. The lawyer's face was thoughtful. Miss Mercer's analysis is compelling, and the pattern she's identified appears across multiple independent sources. A county judge would likely consider that sufficient grounds for inquiry. Vernon's face went from red to pale. Whose side are you on? The law's side, Thornton said, and right now the law would probably favor an investigation. Then we'll petition for one, Marcus said. Today, right now. We'll go to Sheriff Dalton, file a formal complaint, and request a county investigation into your business practices. The sheriff won't act on this, Vernon said, but he sounded less certain now. Maybe not immediately, Marcus agreed, but once it's on record, once people start asking questions, you won't be able to hide behind reputation anymore. Vernon looked around the room, seeing his position collapse. 5 determined farmers, a lawyer who'd stopped defending him, and Emily with her charts and calculations that he couldn't actually refute. This will destroy me, he said quietly. You destroyed yourself, Emily said. The moment you decided stealing from your neighbors was acceptable. Vernon's eyes met hers, and for just a moment, Emily saw something like genuine desperation there. This man who'd seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was cornered, and he knew it. "I'll make restitution," he said finally, "to these 5 farms. We'll calculate the exact amounts, and I'll repay every dollar with interest. But this ends here. No investigation, no public scandal, no destruction of my business." "No," Emily said before anyone else could respond. "This doesn't end with 5 farms. Every farmer in this valley deserves to know what you did, deserves a chance to review their own records and claim what you stole from them." "That's impossible," Vernon said. "Even if I wanted to, which I'm not admitting I need to, I don't have that kind of money available." "Then you sell assets," Caleb said. "Take out loans. Figure it out. But you will repay every dollar you stole from every family you cheated. And if I refuse?" "Then we go to the sheriff," Marcus said, "and then the county judge, and then every newspaper within 100 miles, and we keep going until everyone knows exactly what you are." Vernon sat down heavily, looking 10 years older. "You'll ruin me." "No," Emily said. "We'll hold you accountable. There's a difference." The negotiation that followed took 2 hours. Thornton brokered the terms, writing everything down with legal precision. Vernon would publicly acknowledge the accounting irregularities. He refused to call it theft, and after arguing for 30 minutes, they let him have that small victory. He would open his books to independent review. He would calculate restitution for every affected farmer, and he would pay back every dollar over the next 18 months, secured by a lien against the mill itself. It wasn't perfect. Emily wanted full admission of fraud, wanted criminal charges, wanted Vernon to face actual consequences beyond financial repayment. But Marcus pointed out that getting the money back mattered more than vengeance, that families needed those dollars to survive more than they needed to see Vernon Pike in jail. So Emily swallowed her objections and focused on making sure the agreement was ironclad. By noon, the document was signed. Vernon's hand shook as he wrote his name, and Emily felt a strange mixture of triumph and emptiness watching him. They'd won. Technically. The farmers would get their money back. Vernon's reputation was damaged, probably permanently, but something about it felt incomplete. The crowd that had gathered in the street had grown significantly by the time they emerged from Vernon's office. Emily counted at least 30 people, maybe more, all waiting to hear what had happened. Marcus Webb took it upon himself to explain. He stood on the steps of the grain mill and announced in clear, carrying tones that Vernon Pike had acknowledged accounting irregularities that had resulted in farmers being underpaid for their grain, that an independent review would be conducted, that full restitution would be made. He didn't call it fraud, didn't call it theft, used the careful language Thornton had insisted upon, but the crowd understood anyway. Emily watched reactions ripple through the gathered townspeople. Shock, anger, disbelief, vindication. Some people looked at her with newfound respect, others with suspicion, like she'd brought trouble to Silver Creek that would have been better left buried. Wade Harper was there, his face twisted with something ugly. When the crowd began to disperse, he pushed his way toward Emily with obvious intent. "This what you wanted?" he demanded. "To come into our town and tear down a respected businessman?" "I wanted the truth," Emily said evenly. "Nothing more." "The truth," Wade scoffed. "You wanted attention, wanted to feel important, wanted everyone to pay attention to the poor little mail-order bride who—" He didn't get to finish. Marcus Webb stepped between them, his posture making his position clear. "Walk away, Wade," Marcus said quietly. "Or what? You gonna defend her honor like Caleb does?" Wade's voice dripped with mockery. "You all realize she's probably lying about the whole thing, right? Probably convinced Vernon to sign that agreement just to make her shut up and go away." "The numbers don't lie," Thomas Brennan said, appearing on Emily's other side. "I saw the evidence myself. Vernon's been cheating us." "So she says—" "So the ledgers say," Cooper added, joining the growing wall of farmers around Emily. "You want to see them yourself, Wade? Want to check the math? Or are you too stupid to understand it?" Wade's face flushed dark red. "You're all fools. Letting some woman who's been here 3 days convince you—" "She didn't convince us of anything," Marcus interrupted. "She showed us proof. Mathematical, undeniable proof. Now you can either accept that or keep making an ass of yourself. Your choice." Wade looked around, seeing that the crowd's sympathy had shifted. People who might have supported him yesterday were now watching with disapproval. The farmers surrounding Emily stood firm, united in a way that made continuing the confrontation pointless. "This isn't over," Wade muttered, but he was already backing away. "Yeah, it is," Marcus said. "Miss Mercer did this valley a service. Time you recognize that." Wade left, but Emily could feel the weight of his resentment like a physical thing. "Don't mind him," Marcus said to Emily. "Wade's always been an idiot. Most folks with sense can see what you did here." "Can they?" Emily wasn't sure. Looking at the dispersing crowd, she saw plenty of uncertain faces. People who weren't sure what to think, who were weighing her accounting against years of trusting Vernon Pike. "They will," Marcus said with confidence. "Give them time to check their own records, to see the pattern for themselves. You've started something here, Miss Mercer, something that's going to change how people in this valley do business." Emily wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the triumph she thought she'd feel at this moment. Instead, she mostly felt exhausted. The group returned to Caleb's ranch to finalize the details of the independent review. Thornton had agreed to coordinate it, working with an accountant from the county seat to verify Emily's findings and calculate exact restitution amounts for every farmer in the valley. Emily spent the afternoon transferring her work to Thornton, explaining her methodology, walking him through every calculation. The lawyer listened with the focused attention of someone who understood he was witnessing something significant. "You could do this professionally, you know," Thornton said when they'd finished. "Work as a private accountant. Businesses would pay well for someone with your skills." Emily blinked at him. I don't have formal training." "You have something better," Thornton interrupted. "You have natural ability and real-world experience. The formal training is just paperwork, Miss Mercer. What you did here, uncovering fraud that's been hidden for years, that's the kind of work people need." The idea lodged in Emily's mind like a seed, small but persistent. That evening, after everyone had left and the ranch fell quiet again, Emily sat on the porch watching the sun set over the wheat fields. Caleb joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Hell of a few days," he said, handing her a cup. "That's one way to put it." Emily wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. 3 days ago, I didn't know this place existed. Now I've exposed the biggest fraud in the valley's history and made enemies of half the town. Quarter of the town, maybe, Caleb said. The rest are starting to come around. Are they? Marcus told me 3 more farmers came to him this afternoon asking to see your analysis. Said they want to check their own books now. Caleb sipped his coffee. That's not people turning against you, that's people starting to believe. Emily wanted that to be true, needed it to be true. What happens now? She asked. After the review? After Vernon pays back the money? I don't know, Caleb admitted. Depends on what you want to happen. What I want? You came here answering an advertisement, Caleb said carefully. Looking for a fresh start, a new life. You've got that now, whether you stay or go. You've proved you're capable, brilliant, worthy of respect. You could stay in Silver Creek, work as an accountant like Thornton suggested. Or you could move to the county seat, start fresh somewhere nobody knows you as the mail-order bride who exposed Vernon Pike. Emily's throat tightened. You want me to leave? No, Caleb said immediately. I very much want you to stay. But I also want you to have choices, Emily. Real choices. Not just desperation. Emily looked at him in the fading light. This man who'd defended her, believed in her, stood beside her through everything, who was now offering her freedom instead of demanding gratitude. I don't know what I want, she admitted. A week ago I knew exactly what my life was. Knew my limits, my options, what I could realistically hope for. Now everything's different, and I don't know how to think about the future anymore. Then don't, Caleb said simply. Don't think about it yet. Just be here now. We'll figure out the rest as we go. It was such a simple permission, but Emily felt something loosen in her chest. She didn't have to have all the answers, didn't have to plan her entire future tonight. She could just sit on this porch, drink bitter coffee, and watch the sky turn colors she'd never seen back east. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me, Emily said. For believing I was worth defending before you even knew if I could do what I claimed. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Sarah used to say that trust was a gift you gave people, not something they had to earn. Said if you waited for proof before trusting anyone, you'd spend your whole life alone. She sounds like she was wise. She was, Caleb agreed. Drove me crazy sometimes, but she was right about most things. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The wheat rustled in the evening breeze. The world felt simultaneously enormous and intimate. Emily thought about Vernon Pike signing that agreement with shaking hands, about Wade Harper's furious face, about Marcus Webb and the other farmers who'd stood around her like a wall, protecting her from the town's judgment. She thought about calculations that had revealed truth, about numbers that hadn't lied when people did, about the strange power of arithmetic to expose what people wanted hidden. And she thought about the fact that for the first time in her 34 years, she'd fought back instead of shrinking away, that she'd stood up instead of staying small, that she'd mattered. "Caleb?" she said into the darkness. "Yeah?" "I think I want to stay." She felt rather than saw his smile. "Yeah?" "Yeah," Emily confirmed. "At least for a while. See how this plays out?" "Good," Caleb said. "That's good." And sitting there on the porch of a ranch that was starting to feel like home, with a man who believed in her beside her, and a valley full of farmers who'd just learned her name, Emily let herself feel something she'd spent years suppressing. Not just hope anymore. Certainty. The certainty that she'd found a place where her intelligence wasn't a liability, where her abilities had value, where she could stand at full height instead of making herself smaller to fit into spaces never designed for women like her. The battle with Vernon Pike wasn't over. There would be more fights ahead, more people who doubted her, more obstacles to overcome. But Emily Mercer had already proved something crucial. She was strong enough to face them. The certainty lasted exactly 4 days. Then the county accountant arrived, and Emily discovered that proving fraud to farmers was one thing. Proving it to a man whose job depended on maintaining good relations with local businesses was something else entirely. His name was Whitmore, and he arrived on a Tuesday morning with a leather satchel and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Thornton made the introductions in Caleb's main room, where Emily had set up a temporary workspace with all her documentation organized and ready for review. "Miss Mercer," Whitmore said, his handshake brief and perfunctory, "I understand you've made some serious allegations regarding Mr. Pike's business practices." "Not allegations," Emily corrected. "Findings, based on mathematical analysis of transaction records." Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly. "You have formal training in accounting?" "I have 6 years of practical experience keeping books for multiple businesses." "I see." His tone suggested he didn't see it all, or more accurately, that he saw exactly what he expected. A woman playing at work she didn't truly understand. "Well, let's review what you've compiled, and I'll determine whether there's merit to pursuing this further." Emily felt Caleb's presence behind her, steady and poignant. She took a breath and walked Whitmore through her analysis, starting with the initial discovery in Caleb's ledgers and progressing through the pattern she'd identified across multiple farms. Whitmore listened with an expression of studied neutrality, occasionally making notes but asking few questions. When Emily finished her presentation, he sat back in his chair and tapped his pencil against his notebook. "Miss Mercer, I appreciate the effort you've put into this," he began, and Emily's stomach sank at his tone. "However, accounting for agricultural commerce is considerably more complex than you might realize. There are seasonal variations, quality adjustments, moisture content calculations." "I accounted for all of those," Emily interrupted. "The shortages persist even when controlling for legitimate variables." "You believe you accounted for them," Whitmore said with infuriating patience. "But without formal training, you may have missed nuances that would explain these apparent discrepancies." "They're not apparent discrepancies," Emily said, fighting to keep her voice level. "They're systematic fraud. That's a very serious charge." Whitmore's expression hardened. "And frankly, Miss Mercer, you don't have the credentials to make it. I've reviewed your calculations, and while they show a certain rudimentary competence, they lack the rigor necessary for a formal fraud investigation." Emily felt heat rise in her face. "Rudimentary competence? I mean no offense," Whitmore said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But there's a difference between keeping simple books and conducting forensic accounting analysis. Vernon Pike has been in business for decades, his father before him. The likelihood that you've uncovered fraud that went undetected for years is frankly minimal." "The likelihood is 100%, Emily said flatly, "because I have the evidence right here." "You have numbers that you've interpreted in a particular way," Whitmore corrected. "That's not the same as evidence." Caleb stepped forward. 8 farmers have reviewed their records and confirmed the same pattern of shortage. That's not interpretation. That's documentation. 8 farmers who were encouraged to find problems by Miss Mercer's initial allegations, Whitmore countered. Confirmation bias is a well-documented phenomenon, Mr. Turner. When people are told what to look for, they tend to find it whether it's actually there or not. So you're saying we're all mistaken? Marcus Webb spoke from the doorway. Emily hadn't heard him arrive, but she was profoundly grateful for his presence. That 8 independent farms all imagined the same shortage pattern. I'm saying that without proper forensic analysis conducted by a certified professional, I cannot recommend the county pursue charges against Mr. Pike. Whitmore stood, clearly considering the matter closed. If you'd like to hire a private investigator at your own expense, that's your prerogative, but the county will not be taking action based on Miss Mercer's amateur findings. The word amateur landed like a slap. This is horseshit, Marcus said bluntly. Vernon Pike signed an agreement acknowledging the accounting irregularities. He agreed to make restitution. That's an admission of guilt. That's a business settlement, Whitmore corrected. Mr. Pike was likely trying to avoid the expense and aggravation of a prolonged dispute. His willingness to settle doesn't constitute an admission of fraud. Then what would constitute an admission? Emily demanded. What exactly would it take for you to acknowledge what's right in front of you? Whitmore looked at her with something close to pity. Miss Mercer, I understand you're new to Silver Creek, and perhaps eager to make an impression. But accusing respected businessmen of criminal activity based on limited understanding of complex accounting practices isn't the way to do it. My advice would be to step back from this matter before you damage your own reputation further. He left before Emily could formulate a response, taking his leather satchel and his dismissive condescension with him. The room fell into heavy silence. Bastard, Marcus said finally. Absolute bastard. Emily sat down heavily, feeling something crack inside her chest. She'd expected resistance, expected people to doubt her, but having a supposed professional completely invalidate her work, dismiss her abilities as amateur incompetence, that cut deeper than she'd anticipated. He's wrong, Caleb said quietly. You know that, right? Whitmore's wrong. Is he? Emily's voice came out smaller than she wanted. Maybe I did miss something. Maybe there are complexities I don't understand. Maybe it... Stop. Caleb crouched beside her chair, forcing her to meet his eyes. You didn't miss anything. Whitmore's not dismissing your work because it's flawed. He's dismissing it because accepting it would mean calling out a powerful local businessman. It's easier for him to blame your inexperience than do his actual job. Caleb's right, Marcus added. Whitmore's been doing county accounting for 15 years. You think he doesn't know Vernon Pike personally? Probably does business with him. No way he's going to torch that relationship based on calculations from a woman he's never met. Emily wanted to believe them, wanted to trust that her work was solid, and Whitmore was simply corrupt or cowardly. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with familiar efficiency. What if she had missed something? What if her calculations were wrong, and she'd convinced 8 families to accuse an innocent man? What if everything Whitmore said was true, and she was just an amateur playing at work she didn't understand? I need to check everything again, she said abruptly, standing. Go through every calculation, every assumption, verify. Emily, you've checked it a dozen times already, Caleb said. Then I'll check it 13 times. Emily was already pulling out ledgers, spreading them across the table with shaking hands. If Whitmore's going to dismiss my work as amateur, I need to make sure it's absolutely bulletproof. It already is bulletproof, Marcus argued. Apparently not. Emily's voice cracked slightly. Apparently it's rudimentary and lacking in rigor, and she stopped, pressing her palms against the table, fighting the tears that threatened. She would not cry, would not give Whitmore or Wade Harper or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her break. Caleb and Marcus exchanged a look. Marcus nodded once and quietly left, closing the door behind him. Talk to me, Caleb said. There's nothing to talk about. Emily kept her eyes on the ledgers. I need to work. Emily, I said I need to work. The words came out sharper than she intended. I need to prove Whitmore wrong. Need to make the calculations so clear that even he can't dismiss them. Need to stop letting other people define your worth, Caleb finished quietly. Emily's hand stilled on the ledgers. You're brilliant, Caleb continued. Your work is meticulous and accurate. Whitmore's dismissal says nothing about your abilities and everything about his priorities. But you're about to tear apart perfectly good analysis because one dismissive bureaucrat made you doubt yourself. He's a certified professional, Emily said. I'm just what? A woman who taught herself accounting well enough to uncover fraud a certified professional missed? Caleb moved to stand beside her. You're letting him get in your head, Emily. Don't give him that power. Emily closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. What if he's right, though? What if I'm wrong and I've convinced all these families? You're not wrong. Caleb's voice was absolutely certain. I've seen your work. I've watched you calculate and recalculate, check and double-check every number. You're not wrong, and deep down, you know it. Emily opened her eyes and found Caleb watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Concern, yes. Support, definitely. But something else underneath it all. Something that made her breath catch. I'm scared, she admitted. Scared that maybe I'm not as good as I thought. That maybe everyone who ever dismissed me was right. Everyone who ever dismissed you was a fool, Caleb said. Including Whitmore. Especially Whitmore. Emily let out a shaky laugh. You're biased. Absolutely, Caleb agreed. But I'm also right. Over the next week, Emily threw herself back into the analysis with renewed intensity. Not because she doubted her original work, though Whitmore's dismissal had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, but because she needed to build a case so comprehensive that even the county's professional skepticism couldn't dismiss it. She expanded her review to include 12 farms now, as more farmers heard about the investigation and brought their records for examination. The pattern held across every single one. She documented not just the shortages, but the systematic way they varied with economic conditions, the careful calibration that kept them just below the threshold of immediate detection. She prepared charts, graphs, statistical analyses showing the probability of the pattern being coincidental. The numbers were damning, less than 1% chance of the shortages being accidental, effectively impossible. But she also prepared something else, a presentation designed for people without accounting backgrounds. Clear, simple explanations of what the numbers meant. Visual aids that anyone could understand. Testimonials from farmers describing the real-world impact of losing 3% of their income year after year. If Whitmore wouldn't act on technical analysis, she'd give the Valley a story they couldn't ignore. Caleb watched this evolution with quiet approval, bringing her meals she forgot to eat and coffee that kept her functional through long nights. He didn't push her to rest, didn't tell her she was working too hard. He seemed to understand that she needed this, needed to rebuild the certainty Whitmore had damaged. 10 days after Whitmore's dismissive visit, Emily had finished her expanded analysis. It was comprehensive, bulletproof, and absolutely devastating. What now? Caleb asked, reviewing the final presentation. Now we take it to the people, Emily said. Whitmore won't help us, fine. But Vernon Pike agreed to make restitution. That agreement is binding. We just need to make sure every farmer in this valley knows they're entitled to claim it. You want to go public? I want to go very public. Emily felt something solidify in her chest. We call a town meeting. Present the evidence to everyone at once. Let them see for themselves what Vernon did. That's going to make you even more of a target, Caleb warned. People who've been defending Vernon will feel like you're attacking them personally. Let them feel attacked, Emily said with more confidence than she'd felt in days. The truth isn't an attack. It's just truth. The town meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at the community hall. Word spread quickly. Emily suspected Marcus had a hand in that, and by Friday evening, it seemed like everyone in Silver Creek knew about the gathering and what it would address. Emily spent Friday night preparing herself mentally for what would essentially be a public trial. Not of Vernon Pike, really. Of her. Her credibility, her competence, her right to speak on matters that the town had already decided about. You don't have to do this, Caleb said that evening as they sat on the porch. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments watching the day end. We have the agreement. Vernon will pay restitution. You could let it end there. I could, Emily agreed. But then people like Whitmore win. They get to dismiss women like me as amateurs playing at real work. They get to protect powerful men who deserve to be held accountable. And I get to go back to being small and quiet, and grateful for whatever scraps I'm given. You've never been small or quiet, Caleb observed. No, Emily said, but I've spent a lot of years trying to be. Trying to take up less space, need less, ask for less. I'm done with that. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Good. Good? Yeah. He looked at her in the dimming light. I like you better when you're taking up space. Emily felt warmth spread through her chest at those words. Not romantic warmth exactly, though there was an element of that too, growing stronger each day. But something deeper. The warmth of being seen, of being valued for who she actually was, instead of some diminished version designed to make other people comfortable. Caleb, she said carefully, what are we doing here? You and me? He didn't pretend not to understand. I don't know exactly. Building something maybe, or seeing if we can build something. No rush to define it. The advertisement said you were looking for someone to build a life with. I am. Caleb turned to face her more fully. But I'm not going to hold you to words I wrote before I knew you. You're not obligated to stay just because you answered an ad. What if I want to stay? Then I'd like that very much. Caleb's voice was careful, like he was handling something fragile. But I'd want you to stay because you want to be here, not because you feel trapped or grateful or obligated. Emily considered that. I do want to be here. I think it's complicated. Most worthwhile things are. They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness fell. Somewhere in the distance, a barn owl called. The wheat rustled its eternal whisper. The world felt both enormous and intimate, full of possibility and threat in equal measure. What if tomorrow goes badly? Emily asked quietly. What if the town sides with Vernon and decides, I'm just a troublemaker? Then we deal with it, Caleb said simply. Together. But Emily, I don't think it's going to go badly. Saturday arrived with cloudless skies and Emily's stomach in knots. She dressed in her best outfit, still shabby, still worn, but clean and pressed and as professional as she could manage. Pinned her hair back severely, practiced her presentation one final time. When they arrived at the community hall, Emily was stunned to see it already packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, faces she recognized, and many she didn't. The entire valley had turned out. Vernon Pike sat in the front row with Thornton beside him, his face carefully neutral. Wade Harper lurked near the back, arms crossed, expression hostile. Sheriff Dalton stood by the door looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. Marcus Webb caught Emily's eye from across the room and gave her an encouraging nod. Thornton called the meeting to order and gave a brief overview of the situation. The accounting irregularities discovered by Miss Mercer, the agreement Vernon had signed, the purpose of tonight's meeting to allow all affected farmers to understand their rights under that agreement. Then he turned the floor over to Emily. Walking to the front of the room felt like crossing a battlefield. Every eye followed her. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their skepticism, their curiosity. She reached the small podium someone had set up and took a breath. My name is Emily Mercer, she began, and was relieved to hear her voice come out steady. I know many of you have questions about who I am and why I'm here speaking about Valley business. That's fair. I've been in Silver Creek less than 2 weeks. I'm a stranger to most of you. She saw heads nodding. At least they were listening. But before I came here, I spent 6 years keeping books for businesses back east. I'm good with numbers. Very good. It's not formal training, but it's real experience. And when Caleb Turner asked me to review his farm accounts, I found something wrong. Emily pulled out her first chart, a large visual showing the shortage pattern in Caleb's records. This is what systematic fraud looks like. Small percentages, careful calibration, variation designed to avoid detection. But when you step back and look at the pattern over years, it's undeniable. She walked them through it step by step. Not with technical jargon or complex formulas, but with clear, simple explanations anyone could follow. She showed how the same pattern appeared in farm after farm, showed the correlation with drought years, showed the statistical impossibility of it being coincidental. And then she showed them something else, the real cost. Marcus Webb lost $43 over 4 years, she said, pointing to a farmer many in the room knew personally. That doesn't sound like much until you realize it's a month's worth of feed for his livestock. Thomas Brennan lost $51. That's the difference between keeping his land and selling it during the drought 2 years ago. She went through farmer after farmer, putting names and faces to the stolen money, making it real in a way numbers alone couldn't. Vernon Pike didn't steal from strangers, Emily said. He stole from his neighbors, from people who trusted him, from families who could barely afford to lose a single dollar, and he did it systematically, deliberately, for years. The room was completely silent now. Mr. Pike has signed an agreement to make restitution, Emily continued. That means every farmer in this valley who sold grain through his mill is entitled to review their records and claim what was taken from them. You have that right. I'm here tonight to make sure you know it. She stepped back from the podium, her part finished. Her hands were shaking, but she'd done it, said everything she needed to say. Vernon Pike stood slowly. May I respond? Thornton nodded reluctantly. Vernon faced the room, his expression carefully composed. I want to address Miss Mercer's allegations directly. She's accused me of fraud, of deliberately cheating my neighbors. Those are serious charges, and they're not true. Emily felt her stomach drop. Was he going to deny everything? Claim the agreement was signed under duress? What is true, Vernon continued, is that there were accounting irregularities in my business. Small shortages that I was not aware of. When Miss Mercer brought these to my attention, I agreed to investigate and make restitution if warranted. That was almost the truth. Close enough to be technically accurate while completely avoiding the word fraud. However, Vernon said, his voice hardening, I take strong exception to being called a thief, to having my character and my family's reputation attacked by someone who has been in this community for less than 2 weeks. Miss Mercer may be good with numbers, but she knows nothing about this valley or the people in it. Several heads nodded at this. Emily saw Wade Harper's expression brighten with vindication. I've served Silver Creek for 23 years, Vernon continued. My father served it for 30 years before me. We've helped farmers through droughts and hard times. We've extended credit when banks wouldn't. We've been part of this community's foundation, and I won't stand here and let an outsider destroy that legacy with amateur accounting and wild accusations. The room erupted in murmurs. Some supportive of Vernon, some critical, all of them loud and overlapping. Emily felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. Then Marcus Webb stood. Vernon, I've known you my whole life, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise. My father did business with your father. I've always considered you a friend. Vernon's expression softened. Marcus, I appreciate, but you stole from me, Marcus interrupted. You can dress it up however you want. Call it irregularities or accounting errors or whatever makes you sleep at night. But you stole from me, from Thomas, from Cooper, from every farmer in this room, and Miss Mercer proved it. Marcus, I've checked the numbers myself, Marcus continued. Spent hours going through my own ledgers, verifying every calculation she made. She's right, Vernon, about all of it. The pattern, the percentages, the systematic nature of the theft. She's right, and you know it. Vernon's face flushed. You're taking the word of a mail-order bride over someone you've known for decades? I'm taking the word of someone whose math adds up, Marcus shot back. And calling her a mail-order bride like that's an insult just proves you're scared of what she uncovered. Thomas Brennan stood next. I checked my records too. Same pattern, same shortages. Miss Mercer's not lying, Vernon. You are. One by one, farmers stood. 8 of them, then 10, then 12. Each one confirming they'd reviewed their records. Each one confirming the pattern of shortage. Each one standing with Emily against Vernon Pike's reputation and careful words. Vernon looked around the room, seeing his support crumbling. This is mob mentality. You're letting one woman turn you against your own neighbor. You turned us against you when you started stealing, Cooper said flatly. Miss Mercer just proved it. The meeting devolved from there. Arguments broke out between those defending Vernon and those supporting Emily. Voices raised, accusations flew, the community hall descended into chaos. Sheriff Dalton finally restored order by threatening to clear the building. When quiet returned, Thornton stood and outlined the terms of Vernon's agreement. Any farmer who believed they'd been shorted could bring their records for independent review. Verified shortages would be repaid over 18 months. Vernon would bear the cost of the independent review. It wasn't everything Emily had wanted. Vernon had avoided criminal charges, avoided even admitting fault publicly. But 12 farmers had stood with her, had publicly validated her work, her intelligence, her right to speak truth even when uncomfortable. That had to count for something. The crowd dispersed slowly, people clustering in groups to discuss what they'd heard. Emily stood near the podium, suddenly exhausted, waiting for the hall to clear so she could leave without running the gauntlet of questions. A woman approached her, middle-aged, dressed in faded but clean clothes, face lined with years of hard living. "Miss Mercer?" she said quietly. "I'm Helen Brennan, Thomas's wife." Emily braced herself. "Mrs. Brennan, I owe you an apology," Helen said. "When my husband first told me about your findings, I called it nonsense. Told him Vernon Pike was a good man who'd never cheat us." "You weren't wrong to trust him," Emily said carefully. "Yes, I was." Helen's voice was firm. "Because I trusted him over my own husband's judgment, and I definitely trusted him over yours before I'd even met you. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Emily felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "My grandmother was good with numbers too," Helen continued. "Used to keep books for half the businesses in her town back in Pennsylvania. But nobody took her seriously because she was a woman. They'd use her work, benefit from her skills, but never credit her publicly, never pay her what she was worth." Helen met Emily's eyes. "Don't let them do that to you. You proved Vernon Pike was a thief. Own that. Be proud of that." After Helen left, 3 more women approached with similar messages. Gratitude for exposing the fraud. Apologies for initial skepticism. Encouragement to continue speaking truth even when men tried to silence her. By the time Emily made it outside, the sun was setting and her emotions were a tangled mess of triumph and exhaustion and something that felt dangerously like belonging. Caleb was waiting by the wagon, talking quietly with Marcus. When he saw Emily, he broke away and came to her side. "You all right?" he asked. "I think so," Emily said. "That was terrifying, exhilarating, a complete disaster," Caleb offered. "All of those." Emily let out a shaky laugh. "Did we win or lose?" "We won," Caleb said with certainty. "Maybe not completely, but we won." Marcus joined them, looking tired but satisfied. 12 farmers confirmed publicly that you were right. "That's not nothing, Miss Mercer, that's everything." "Vernon still avoided admitting fraud," Emily pointed out. "Publicly," Marcus agreed. "But everyone in that room knows the truth now. His reputation will never be the same. And you? You've established yourself as someone with real skills, real intelligence, real value to this valley." Emily wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that her public stand had mattered, had changed something fundamental. But part of her still heard Whitmore calling her work amateur, still heard Vernon dismissing her as an outsider, still felt the weight of a lifetime being told she didn't matter. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Emily stared at the darkening landscape, processing everything that had happened, everything that had changed in less than 2 weeks. When they reached the house, Caleb helped her down from the wagon and then just stood there, looking at her in the twilight. "What?" Emily asked. "I'm proud of you," Caleb said simply. "Proud of your courage. Proud of how you stood up there and refused to be dismissed. Proud that you're here." Emily felt something crack open in her chest, all the emotions she'd been holding back suddenly pushing toward the surface. "Caleb, She didn't finish the sentence, didn't know how to put into words what she was feeling, but Caleb seemed to understand anyway. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me show you something." He led her past the barn to a small structure she hadn't noticed before. It was new, she realized. The wood still fresh, not yet weathered by sun and wind. About 12 feet square, with a real door and large windows on 2 sides. Caleb opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Inside was a desk. A real desk, solid and well-built, positioned to catch the morning light through an east-facing window. Shelves lined one wall, empty but ready for ledgers and books. A chair sat before the desk, comfortable and sturdy. An office. He'd built her an office. "When did you—" Emily's voice caught. "Started building it the week before you arrived," Caleb said from the doorway. "Finished it yesterday." "You built this before you even knew if I'd stay?" "I built it hoping you would." Caleb stepped inside, his presence somehow making the small space feel both smaller and safer. "Whatever you decide, Emily, whether you stay here or go somewhere else, whether we figure out how to build something together or just remain friends, you deserve a place that's yours, where your work is valued, where you can be exactly who you are without apology." Emily looked around the office, this space built specifically for her skills, for her value. Not as an afterthought or a courtesy, but as a genuine acknowledgement that she deserved it. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why do you believe in me so completely?" "Because you're brilliant," Caleb said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Because you're brave. Because you walked into a hostile town and exposed fraud that people with formal training missed. Because you stood in front of a room full of skeptics tonight and made them listen. Because you're you, and that's more than enough." Emily turned to face him, this man who'd defended her from the first moment, who'd built her a desk and an office and a space to exist without apology, who looked at her and saw value instead of deficit, capability instead of inadequacy. "I want to stay," she said, "not because I'm desperate or grateful or out of options, but because I want to be here, with you." Caleb's expression shifted into something warm and careful and full of possibility. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Emily took a breath. "I'm still scared, still not sure I'm good enough or smart enough or worthy of—" "Emily." Caleb crossed the space between them, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "You're not good enough. You're better than good enough. You're exceptional. And if you can't see that yet, I'll keep reminding you until you do." "That might take a while. I've got time," Caleb said. Then, carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, asking rather than taking. Emily kissed him back, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not just attraction, though there was that, but recognition, the sense of finding something she hadn't known she was looking for. When they pulled apart, Caleb was smiling. "So, you staying then?" "I'm staying," Emily confirmed. "Good," Caleb said. "That's good." They stood in the office built specifically for her, in the space Caleb had created because he believed she deserved it, and Emily felt something she'd never quite felt before. Not just hope or possibility or temporary certainty, but belonging. The knowledge that she'd found a place where she didn't have to shrink or apologize or diminish herself to fit, a place where being brilliant wasn't a liability, where her intelligence had value, where she could stand at full height and take up exactly as much space as she needed. For the first time in 34 years, Emily Mercer knew exactly who she was, and she was done apologizing for it. The kiss changed things, but not in the ways Emily expected. She'd imagined that crossing that threshold with Caleb would make everything suddenly clear, would resolve the questions about what they were to each other and where this was heading. Instead, it just opened up new territory that neither of them quite knew how to navigate. They didn't talk about it that night, just walked back to the house in comfortable silence, Emily's hand finding Caleb's halfway across the yard, their fingers interlacing like it was the most natural thing in the world. The next morning brought reality crashing back. A wagon rolled up to the ranch just after dawn, and Emily looked out to see Thomas Brennan climbing down with a wooden crate that looked ominously familiar. "More ledgers," he said when Emily came outside, wiping sleep from her eyes. "Helen insisted I bring them first thing. Said you deserve to know the full extent of what Vernon stole from us." Emily took the crate, feeling the weight of it in her arms and in her chest. The town meeting had been 2 days ago. She'd thought maybe, finally, she could rest, could stop proving herself and just exist. Apparently not. "Thomas, you don't have to—" "You admit—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "Helen checked our records last night, went back 7 years. She found patterns I missed, discrepancies I'd written off as my own mistakes. Vernon stole $68 from us, Emily. $68 over 7 years. He said it quietly, but Emily heard the rage underneath. $68 might not sound like much to some people, but to a farming family barely scraping by, it was devastating. "I'll review them," Emily promised. "Add them to the total." "It's not just about the money anymore," Thomas said. "It's about the principle, about holding people accountable when they think they're too important to face consequences." After he left, Emily sat on the porch steps with the crate beside her, watching the sun climb over the distant mountains. She was tired, bone-deep tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. Tired of fighting, of proving, of constantly justifying her existence and her abilities. Caleb found her there an hour later, still sitting with the unopened crate. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, settling beside her. "I'm not sure I want to do it at all," Emily admitted. "Is it wrong that I just want to be done? That I want Vernon to pay what he owes and then forget any of this happened?" "It's not wrong," Caleb said. It's human. You've been carrying this for 2 weeks straight. You're allowed to be exhausted. But if you stop now, you've still accomplished more than anyone expected. Exposed fraud, secured restitution for a dozen families, established yourself as someone with real skills. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. Emily, you don't owe this valley your complete destruction. You're allowed to set boundaries. Emily turned to look at him. What if I'm the only one who can do this? What if I stop and families who deserve compensation don't get it because I was too tired to help them? Then other people step up, Caleb said. Helen Brennan checked her own records, didn't she? Other people are learning to look for the pattern. You've taught them how. That's enough. Was it enough? Emily wasn't sure. But sitting there with the morning sun warming her face and Caleb solid beside her, she let herself consider the possibility that maybe it could be. Over the next 2 weeks, a strange new rhythm established itself. Emily worked through the ledgers that farmers brought because she couldn't quite bring herself to turn them away, but she did it on her own terms. 3 hours in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and then she was done. The rest of the time, she learned the ranch. Caleb taught her to collect eggs without getting pecked, to understand the subtle signs that indicated cattle health, to read weather patterns in the clouds gathering over the mountains. She was terrible at most of it initially, and he never once made her feel stupid for not knowing. You're a natural with the garden, though, he observed one afternoon, watching her weed between the vegetable rows with systematic precision. You approach it like accounting, organized, methodical. Everything has a pattern, Emily said, pulling up a stubborn dandelion. You just have to find it. Is that your philosophy on life? Emily considered. Maybe. I spent years thinking I was the problem, the thing that didn't fit the pattern. Turns out the pattern was wrong. Caleb was quiet for a moment. That's profound. That's trauma, Emily corrected, but without bitterness. Years of being told you're defective teaches you to look for flaws in everything except the system that labeled you defective in the first place. And now? Now I'm learning to question the system instead of myself. Emily sat back on her heels, surveying her work. It's harder than it sounds. Most worthwhile things are, Caleb said, echoing his words from weeks ago. The town's attitude toward Emily shifted slowly, grudgingly, but unmistakably. Women who'd ignored her at the general store now nodded in greeting. Men who'd laughed when she first arrived now tipped their hats. It wasn't universal. Wade Harper still glared whenever their paths crossed, and a handful of Vernon Pike's staunch defenders made their disapproval clear. But it was progress. The real change came 5 weeks after the town meeting, when Sheriff Dalton showed up at the ranch with unexpected news. Vernon Pike's leaving Silver Creek, Dalton said without preamble. Selling the mill, selling his house, packing up and heading to California. Emily set down the ledger she'd been reviewing. When? End of the month. Says he can't run a business in a town that doesn't trust him anymore. Dalton's expression was unreadable. Wanted you to know before the gossip spreads. Is he going to fulfill the restitution agreement? Caleb asked sharply. That's why I'm here. Dalton pulled out a legal document. He's transferring ownership of the mill to a trust managed by Thornton. All proceeds from the sale will go toward repaying the families he cheated. It's legally binding. He can't back out without facing criminal charges. Emily took the document, scanning the legal language. It was legitimate, comprehensive. Vernon Pike was actually going to pay back every dollar he'd stolen. How much total, she asked. $1,437, Dalton said. Across 26 farms. That's based on the records you and others verified. $1,400. The number Emily had calculated weeks ago when this was just beginning. She'd been right about all of it. There's something else, Dalton continued, looking uncomfortable. Vernon asked me to deliver a message. Said to tell you that you were right, and he was sorry. Emily laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. He's sorry he got caught. Probably, Dalton agreed. But for what it's worth, I'm sorry too. Sorry I didn't take you seriously when you first brought this forward. Sorry I let his reputation matter more than the evidence. You deserved better from me. It was the closest thing to an apology Emily had gotten from anyone in an official capacity. She accepted it with a nod, not quite ready to forgive, but willing to acknowledge the effort. After Dalton left, Emily sat with the legal document in her hands, trying to process what it meant. Vernon Pike was leaving. The fraud was being addressed. The families would get their money back. She'd won. Completely, undeniably won. So why did she feel so hollow? "You all right?" Caleb asked, sitting beside her at the kitchen table. "I don't know," Emily admitted. "I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, something more than just tired." "Winning doesn't always feel like people think it should," Caleb said. "Sometimes it just feels like surviving." Emily looked at him. "Is that what this is? Survival?" "Maybe. Or maybe it's the aftermath, the part where you realize the fight is over and you don't know what to do with yourself anymore." That resonated. Emily had spent weeks in constant motion, constant proving, constant battle. Now that the immediate crisis was resolved, she didn't know what came next. "What do you want to do?" Caleb asked. "Really want, not what you think you should want or what other people expect." Emily closed her eyes, trying to locate the answer underneath all the noise in her head. "I want to stop fighting," she said finally. "I want to just be, without constantly proving I deserve to exist in spaces I occupy." "Then stop fighting," Caleb said simply. "It's not that easy." "Maybe it is," Caleb countered. "You've proved everything you needed to prove, Emily. Vernon's paying restitution. The town respects you. You have work opportunities. Thornton's mentioned 3 times that you could work as a professional accountant. You have choices now, real ones. And if I choose to stay here, just work the ranch with you, keep some books on the side, live a quiet life?" Emily opened her eyes. "What if people think I'm wasting my potential?" "Then let them think it," Caleb said. "Your life isn't a performance for other people's approval. You get to decide what matters to you." Emily let those words settle. Your life isn't a performance. She'd spent 34 years performing, trying to be smaller, quieter, less troublesome. Then the past 2 months performing in the opposite direction, trying to be brilliant enough, fierce enough, undeniable enough to earn respect. What if she just stopped performing entirely? What if she just existed? The idea was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. "I need to think," she said. "Take all the time you need," Caleb replied. Emily spent the next week in her office, the space Caleb had built specifically for her, working through what she actually wanted. Not what she should want, or what would impress people, or what would prove her worth. Just what she wanted. She made lists, crossed things off, made new lists. The process was messier than accounting, less clear-cut, but eventually something emerged. She wanted to stay in Silver Creek, wanted to build a life with Caleb if he was willing, wanted to use her accounting skills but on her own terms, helping farmers manage their books, consulting on contracts, teaching others the skills she'd taught herself. Work that mattered without consuming her entirely. She wanted space to garden, to read, to exist without every moment being about proving something. She wanted, quite simply, to be happy. The realization felt almost scandalous in its simplicity. After years of just trying to survive, of measuring success by whether she made it through another day without being completely destroyed, wanting happiness felt almost greedy, but she wanted it anyway. When she finally emerged from the office with her lists and her decisions, she found Caleb in the barn repairing a fence rail. He looked up when she approached, his expression open and patient. "I've been thinking," Emily said without preamble, "about what comes next. And I want to stay. Here with you, if you'll have me." The words came out in a rush. "Not because I'm desperate or grateful or out of options, but because this is where I want to be. I want to build a life here, a real partnership. I want to work with local farmers on their accounting, maybe teach some basic bookkeeping classes for people who need those skills. I want to help you expand the ranch like you talked about. I want to plant a bigger garden next spring. I want—" She stopped, realizing she was babbling, but Caleb was smiling. "I want all of that too," he said. "Every bit of it." "You're sure?" "Because I'm not easy. I'm stubborn and I overthink everything, and I'll probably have moments where I doubt my worth all over again." "Emily," Caleb crossed the space between them, "I know who you are. I've seen you at your most uncertain and your most fierce. I've watched you expose fraud while doubting yourself every step of the way. I've seen you brilliant and scared and absolutely determined, and I want all of it, all of you." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not good at this, at being wanted." "Then we'll figure it out together," Caleb said. "No rush. No expectations beyond honesty and partnership. Just us, Building something that works for both of us. That sounds, Emily searched for the right word. Possible. It sounds possible. It is possible, Caleb said. It's more than possible. It's already happening. He was right. They'd already been building it. In the quiet mornings, working side by side. In the evenings on the porch, watching the sunset. In the way Caleb defended her and Emily challenged him, and they both learned to trust that the other would be there tomorrow. So what now? Emily asked. Now we keep going, Caleb said. One day at a time, no grand pronouncements or promises we're not ready to make, just us being here, together. Emily nodded. I can do that. I know you can, Caleb said, and kissed her. The summer progressed into autumn, and Emily settled into her new life with surprising ease. She took on 6 farming families as regular clients, helping them manage their books and understand their finances. She taught a basic accounting class at the community hall that drew 15 students, mostly women who'd been managing household finances but never had formal instruction. She worked in her garden until her hands were permanently stained with dirt. She learned to make bread that didn't turn out like rocks. She discovered she was actually quite good at negotiating grain prices, possibly because she understood the numbers better than the merchants did. And slowly, gradually, she stopped measuring her worth by other people's opinions. Not completely. Old wounds didn't heal that fast, but enough that she could walk through Silver Creek without her stomach clenching in anticipation of mockery. Enough that she could speak in meetings without second-guessing every word. Enough that she could look in the mirror and see someone capable instead of someone defective. Vernon Pike left town in late September. Emily didn't go to watch him go, didn't need that closure. The mill sold to a younger man from the county seat who seemed genuinely committed to honest business practices. The restitution payments began flowing to the affected families. Emily's work was done. Except it wasn't, really. Because the work of building a life wasn't something you completed and checked off a list. It was ongoing, daily, full of small choices about who you wanted to be and how you wanted to show up. October brought the first serious frost. Emily woke one morning to find the world transformed, everything coated in crystalline white. She stood at the window, watching the sun turn the frost into diamonds, and felt Caleb's arms wrap around her from behind. Beautiful, he murmured. It is, Emily agreed. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the morning light transform the landscape. Eventually, Caleb spoke again. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about us, about what we're building here. Emily's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. And I want to court you properly. Not because the advertisement said I should or because it's expected, but because I've fallen in love with you, Emily Mercer, and I want you to know it. Emily turned in his arms to face him. You love me? Completely, Caleb said without hesitation. I love your brilliant mind and your fierce determination. I love how you attack problems like personal enemies. I love watching you in your garden with dirt under your fingernails looking more content than I've ever seen you. I love how you've transformed this ranch from a place I existed in to somewhere that feels like home. Emily felt tears spill over despite her best efforts to contain them. I love you too, she whispered. I didn't think I could. Didn't think I was capable of trusting anyone that much. But I do. I love you. Caleb kissed her then, soft and certain, and Emily kissed him back with the knowledge that she'd found something she didn't know she was searching for. Not rescue or salvation or someone to complete her, just partnership, equality. Someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway. They were married in November, a small ceremony at the ranch with Marcus Webb and Helen Brennan standing as witnesses. Emily wore a simple dress that Helen had helped her sew, nothing fancy but clean and new, and hers. Caleb wore his Sunday clothes and looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. There was no music, no flowers, no elaborate celebration, just 2 people promising to build a life together, witnessed by friends who'd seen them at their worst and believed in them anyway. Wade Harper didn't attend. A few other townspeople stayed away too, making their disapproval clear. Emily found she didn't care. The people who mattered were there. That was enough. The winter that followed was harsh, testing in ways Emily hadn't anticipated. There were days when money was tight, and the wind cut through the walls, and she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Days when old insecurities rose up and whispered that she didn't deserve happiness, that it would all fall apart eventually. But there were also days when she sat in her office reviewing accounts while snow fell outside and felt perfectly content. Days when she and Caleb worked side by side in comfortable silence, so attuned to each other that words weren't necessary. Days when she realized she'd gone an entire week without questioning her worth. Those days came more frequently as winter progressed into spring. By the time the wheat began growing again, green and hopeful in the fields, Emily had established something she'd never quite achieved before. Not just acceptance in the community, though she had that now mostly. Not just professional success, though her accounting business was growing steadily. But peace, the internal kind that didn't depend on external validation. She was sitting on the porch one evening in late April when Marcus Webb rode up with news. "The county's looking for someone to audit their books," he said without preamble. "Proper official position, decent pay, real authority. Thornton suggested you for it." Emily blinked. "Me?" "Said you're the best accountant he's worked with. Said the county would be lucky to have you." Marcus grinned. "Man's got a point." Emily's first instinct was to say yes immediately. Official position, real authority. Proof that she'd arrived, that she was legitimate, that all her skills and experience meant something. But then she paused. What would it involve? She asked carefully. Monthly trips to the county seat, reviewing all government accounts. Probably some testimony if fraud is discovered. Standard bureaucratic work. Marcus studied her face. "You interested?" Emily thought about it, really thought about it. The position would be prestigious, would cement her reputation, would prove to everyone, including the part of herself that still doubted, that she was capable and professional and worthy. But it would also mean less time on the ranch, less time with Caleb, less time teaching accounting classes to women who needed those skills, less time for the garden that brought her unexpected joy, less time for the life she'd built. "Tell Thornton I appreciate the recommendation," Emily said finally, "but I'm going to decline." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "You sure? This is the kind of opportunity most people would kill for." "I'm sure," Emily said, and realized she meant it. "I have work here that matters to me. I don't need official validation to know my skills have value." After Marcus left, Caleb came out to join her on the porch. "Heard you turned down the county position." "Did I make a mistake?" Emily asked. "Did you?" Caleb countered. Emily considered. A year ago, hell, 6 months ago, she would have grabbed that opportunity with both hands, would have seen it as proof of her worth, validation she'd spent her life seeking. But she didn't need that anymore. Didn't need prestigious positions or official titles to know she was capable. She'd exposed fraud that professionals missed. She'd built a business from nothing. She'd established herself as someone whose opinion mattered in Silver Creek. More importantly, she'd built a life she actually wanted to live, with work that fulfilled her, a partnership that sustained her, and space to exist without constant performance. "No," she said, "I didn't make a mistake. I made a choice. There's a difference." Caleb smiled and took her hand. "Good choice." They sat together as the evening light turned gold across the wheat fields, comfortable in the silence that had become their native language. Emily thought about the woman who'd stepped off that wagon 2 seasons ago, desperate, exhausted, braced for mockery and disappointment. That woman had survived, had fought back, had rebuilt herself from the ground up. But more than that, she'd learned something crucial, something it had taken 34 years to understand. Her worth wasn't something she needed to prove to anyone else. It wasn't contingent on other people's approval or dependent on achieving certain milestones. It just was. Inherent. Unassailable. True. She'd spent years making herself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for her. Years apologizing for existing, for needing things, for taking up room. Years believing the problem was her instead of the system that labeled her problematic. And then she'd stopped. Not all at once. Not cleanly or perfectly. But gradually, painfully, persistently, she'd stopped shrinking. Started standing at full height. Started trusting that she deserved the space she occupied. It hadn't been easy. Still wasn't easy on the days when old insecurities crept back in. But it was possible. And possible was enough. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Everything," Emily said. "How I got here. How different everything is from what I expected." "Better or worse?" "Better," Emily said without hesitation. "So much better than I let myself hope for." because that was the truth she'd been afraid to believe, that she could have this partnership and peace and work that mattered and a home that felt safe, that she didn't have to choose between being brilliant and being loved, between success and happiness, between her abilities and her humanity. She could have all of it, could be all of it, could simply be herself, sharp-minded and stubborn and still learning to trust that she deserved good things. And that could be enough. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The wheat whispered its eternal conversation with the wind. The world turned on its axis, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow providing the backdrop for them anyway. And Emily Mercer, who'd spent her whole life being told she was wrong, sat on the porch of the ranch she'd helped build and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Not because someone else had validated her presence, not because she'd earned the right through suffering or achievement or constant performance, but because she'd chosen it, because she'd fought for it, because she'd looked at her life and decided it was worth claiming. "I'm glad you came," Caleb said softly. "So am I," Emily replied. And sitting there in the fading light with her hand in his and the future spread before her like the wheat fields, uncertain but full of possibility, Emily let herself feel something she'd denied for 34 years. Pride. Not the defensive kind that came from proving doubters wrong, not the fragile kind that depended on external validation, but the deep, quiet kind that came from knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. She'd come to Silver Creek expecting disappointment. Instead, she'd found herself. The version that had been there all along, buried under years of other people's judgment and her own internalized belief that she was somehow fundamentally lacking. Turned out the only thing she'd been lacking was the courage to believe she deserved better. She had that courage now. Hard-won, battle-tested, absolutely hers, and she would never apologize for it again. The stars began emerging in the darkening sky. Caleb squeezed her hand gently, and Emily squeezed back, a silent communication that needed no words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be difficult days ahead, moments when she doubted herself, people who still questioned her abilities. The world didn't suddenly become perfect just because she'd found peace, but she would face it all standing tall, taking up space, refusing to shrink, because Emily Mercer had learned the most important lesson of her life. She didn't need anyone's permission to be brilliant, didn't need anyone's approval to take up space, didn't need anyone's validation to know her worth. She just needed to believe it herself. And finally, after 34 years of trying to be smaller than she was, Emily did.